monster burst into the chambers of his master, saying that trouble had come to them. The destroyed body of the demon king asked the man what was the problem, and the servant immediately knelt down and said that Demiurgos 666 had just left the castle as soon as he woke up from the egg of awakening. The servant loudly shouted that this creature had renounced the powers of the demon king. The Lord looked at his servant and said that this was complete nonsense, and the servant began to stutter and apologize for such news. After this, the servant took out the contract and said that the last words of this man were written on it, which said that he did not want to be the king of demons and asked everyone not to look for him. Immediately after this, our hero got out into the human world and, looking at it, noticed that it was quite beautiful, after which he headed to the Akama castle of the Verde kingdom. The man looked down with the thought that the human world was truly pleasant, as he had been told. He ran through the streets of the city and enjoyed the warmth of the sun. The only thing that bothered him was the huge cross above one of the buildings. Suddenly our hero was stopped and asked why this hillbilly was walking around here, and where he came from. The guards immediately approached Demiurgos and asked why he was hanging around doing nothing, and Demiurgos was surprised that they called him a hillbilly. He looked at his clothes and decided that it was because in his opinion everything was fine with his face, and meanwhile the guards continued to ask how he dared to wander around this castle. Had he completely lost his fear? After that, one of the guards pointed his weapon at our hero and asked his name. The guy immediately thought about it, and decided that he couldn't call himself here by his real name because it sounded too strange. Then he snapped his fingers and decided that if he just threw out a couple of letters it would do. The man smiled and greeted the people, saying that his name is Deus. Suddenly, another man appeared, looked at Deus and asked how his tongue turns to pronounce the name of the ancient god. Doesn't he know that this is the capital of the Verde kingdom? The guards immediately bowed down to Baron Bro, and in the meantime the Baron said that if he made a mistake, out of ignorance, this time he would simply forgive him and ordered him to get out of here. Deus, meanwhile, smiled and asked, and remove the kingdoms so strong? The Baron looked with hatred at our hero and asked what he was talking about. Our hero smiled again and asked if his body was suitable for the role of a king. The Baron immediately went crazy and took out his blade and said that for insulting the royal family, he would pay with his own head. After these words, Deus was able to tear off everyone's heads with one glance. The rest of the Passions looked at all this in surprise and could not understand why their friends just went and exploded. Our hero smiled again and ran his finger through the air, and the rest of the holiday heads also flew up. The archers noticed this and began shooting to kill, but Deus protected his body with a special aura, and easily deflected all these arrows. After that, he used a necromancer spell and revived the people he had just killed. He said with a smile that it was time for them to welcome their new king. After that, with a fiery speech, he said that they should praise the beginning with their blood, and bless the return of this body with their tears. The rest of the knights immediately began to prepare and talk about the fact that they were attacked. Someone even said that a war had begun, and they were told that everyone outside had already been killed. A couple of minutes later, a huge crowd of knights stood near the castle, but as soon as our hero came close to them, he easily threw away his thoughts with force. The man looked at them and said that they would fill the horn with their cries for his sake. The knights looked at this monster, and could not believe their eyes, and meanwhile Deus continued to advance on the castle. A bloodbath began, and the knights entered into battle with their recently revived comrades. Our hero amused himself and sent various curses on these knights, but they could not believe their eyes and begged to kill them so as not to feel this hell. Meanwhile, our hero, with a huge smile, watched everything he did. Suddenly a man appeared in golden armor, who began to pray on his knees and asked the Lord for help against this monster. This man had long golden hair, and he prayed to God, with the words that victory would come with them, and about death to victory and from lies to truth, he prayed to his Lord. After this, the man began to take out his blade, and it is said that the Lord will give him strength to crush the evil standing in front of him. Finally, he completely took out your blade and stretched it out in front of him with the words that evil must come down to him and take the fight. Deus, meanwhile, smiled and asked if this was the light of the aura and the same blood that he had heard about. Meanwhile, the man with golden hair looked at our hero and said that he does not know who he is, but he clearly sees that this man uses black magic and he cannot believe that he managed to break through the castle's security on his own. The golden-haired knight looked at the demon angrily and said that he could not defeat the blessed Lord. After that, he swung his huge blade and said that although he was not a pure blood, he could defeat Deus. After that, he fell with all his might to the ground at the place where our hero had stood before. He thought that he could defeat the demon with one blow, but suddenly he heard someone say that this night was nothing special. When the dust settled, the man saw that it was a demon holding his blade with its fingers and saying that now it was his turn to attack. Our hero looked at the knight, and also began to read prayers, asking him to kill this idiot in front of him. Our hero said with a smile that he had just also prayed to check which of them the gentleman would help. And a moment later, our hero with one hand was able to pierce the body of this huge knight, and instantly kill him. After which Deus turned around and asked to never mention God to him again. The knight with golden hair could not believe his eyes, and also that he had just lost. After that, Deus headed to the throne room, where he saw that there was already a mountain of guards who wanted to give their lives for their king. The king looked at our hero in surprise and asked if everyone else had lost to just one person, and the knights tried to calm the king down and say that they were the last line of defense, and they needed to defend their positions at all costs. The king was silent for a while, and in his heavy voice asked our hero who he is. Deus, meanwhile, calmly approached the king and said that he was apparently the king of this castle, and therefore they could talk. The knights immediately became furious, and said that Deus did not dare address his majesty like that, and for this he would be punished. After that, our hero smiled and snapped his fingers, tearing their faces to shreds. He was silent for a while after that, and asked, "Are there any people still dissatisfied here?" The knights who had just been completely confident in themselves had already begun to doubt whether they could defeat this person or not. Deus meanwhile said that he liked such circumstances much better, and they jumped into the air. After that, he opened his wings and instantly found himself in front of the king, asking if they could continue the conversation. Meanwhile the king was scared to death and asked what our hero wants, because the king can give him money, the weak and everything he can. Deus looked him straight in the eye and said that he didn't need all this, asking him to give it to the king of his kingdom. The second king immediately began to shout that this was simply impossible, and this had never happened and would never happen. Deus yawned and said that he didn't need anything else from this king, and if he didn't want it, our hero would simply kill him and his entire family, and his kingdom, and go to Deus. Suddenly the king screamed and said that now he understands everything and this guy just wants to take his daughter. Deus scratched his head and said he was braiding that he was not interested, and he didn't know that the king had her. Meanwhile, the king said that this was impossible because April is the pride of the continent, and the flower of their state. Deus was tired of listening to all this and, looking at the king, asked him to keep quiet, because he did not need any daughters or anything else except the kingdom. The old king continued to shout and ask our hero why he wants what does not belong to him. Suddenly, Deus looked straight into the king's eyes with his ominous gaze and asked, does he really think that everything here is his? The old man immediately began to say that this is so because the kingdom belongs to the royal family. Deus looked at this king with a dissatisfied look and asked since when did he think so. After that, he began to explain to the king that this world was not that it was created for this king. In the end, he also stole someone's power. So what the hell is it? In this case, the royal family is here. If he had been sitting on this throne for decades, then it's time to rise because it's time for a generational change. The old king continued to shout at our hero and ask whether Deus really thinks that the saints will approve of this. As soon as our hero heard the word saints, he immediately laughed, a crazy laugh. After that, he opened his wings to full power and said that he didn't care about them. The flash of his power spread throughout the kingdom, and the huge cross was immediately blown up and fell to the ground. And the king and all his knights were already burned. Examining the king's corpse, our hero decided that it seemed he didn't have blood. After all, if he had, the king would have lasted a couple of seconds longer. And that's just the full extent of it. After that, Deus looked up and told God that he was very disappointed because these guys were not prepared at all. Having calmed down a little, the hero said to himself that he would have to wait a little longer before the blood awakened, and there were still about 20 years left. After that, the guy thought that he should have appeared in the first place. Unexpectedly, our hero heard someone's pitiful cry. He looked back and saw a beautiful girl who, with tears in her eyes, asked who he was and what was happening here. The demons who lost the first war returned to the underworld with the broken soul of their king and moved it into a new body. and for 100 years they filled it with all possible types of magic and curses in order to resurrect him again. Later, a new war came and they all believed that no more hero would appear and victory would be theirs. But another fucking hero appeared, and the demons lost the war again. After this, the demons again nursed a new king for 100 years. And this time too, another hero ruined everything. The demons did not despair and spent another 100 years raising a new king. But this time the hero also appeared, and this continued 665 times. It was a tired cliché where a hero comes and saves the world, a carefree time when people believed that the hero would definitely appear when he arrived on time. In the underworld, every time they think that this is the most final ending of all finals, and they persistently create new kings. This time, the demons put absolutely all their strength into creating a new 666 demon king. When the ceremony was completed, after 100 years, the curse of the entire human race opened its eyes on this very day. He ran away saying that he was not going to be the king of demons. Meanwhile, the girl with tears in her eyes was now standing in front of this 666 demon king and was discarding that he killed her father. Deus looked at the girl and did not understand why she bothered him at all. Suddenly I remembered how the king, foaming at the mouth, argued that April was the pride of the continent and the flower of their state. He looked at the girl and asked, "Is she Princess April?" The guy smiled and said that since he was the king of the dead, it was time for him to take his daughter and ascend to the throne. The girl with tears in her eyes could not believe what she heard. After that, Deus pointed his finger at her, immediately subjugated her mind. The girl fell on one knee and said that her insignificant body now belongs entirely to Deus, and she asked to take her away from her master. Deus flew up to her on his wings and took her by the chin and said that from now on she was his first person. The girl thanked her master for such generosity, and Deus said that he did not allow her to speak, and the next time he said that he would gouge out her eyes for disobedience. After this, our hero noticed a strange aura, and turning around saw that some kind of eye had appeared, and from it they began to say that nothing less was expected from their lord. After that, a portal opened, and a man came out of it, all in black and white hair. He said that his name was Alex, and he was a faithful servant of the Demon King. Deus looked at his servant, and asked if he had been following the Demon King all the way, and the servant immediately bowed and said that wherever his milord went he would follow him. Deus said that this is all complete nonsense because Alex serves the father of our hero and not Deus. The man bowed again and said that Deus's body was created by his ancestors with his own hands, for many years, and now only he is the lord of all demons. After that, our hero pointed his finger at him and asked him to shut up, saying that he was not going to return to the demon realm. Alex smiled and said that the will of the Demon King is law for him, and he will not contradict. He also said that he is here to carry out the orders of his king and asked not to pay attention to him, and to continue and not be distracted. Deus looked at his servant and asked what he was going to do. Alex looked at the princess and said that King A was most likely going to reward this woman with his powerful seed. After this, his servant said that he had been serving his king faithfully for 80 years, since he was still a soul. The man began to cry and asked his king if he wanted to hear about the church that he had to bring, which you can't tell without tears and wine. Alex began to say that when our hero was still a baby, he had to change his body in order to breastfeed Deus. Deus stated that it was his perverted idea, and Alex continued to talk about how he became an exemplary teacher thanks to his bottom-up approach to teaching. Deus immediately said that he remembers perfectly how he beat everything he could out of him. Alex also stated that he was the only demon who surrounded our hero with love in the Egg of Awakening. Alex closed his eyes and said that he couldn't believe how our hero grew up because just yesterday he was running around next to everyone when he was tiny. And now he has already discovered women for himself. And Alex also said with a smile that he is an overly emotional person. Deus asked his servant to shut up and said that he is not a demon king because today he was reborn as an ordinary person. Alex smiled and said that everything would be as his master wished. Deus looked at this man angrily and asked what he was up to. The servant said that he did not understand what his master was talking about, and our hero immediately used magic to twist his servant and ask what he was up to and why he agreed with absolutely all the words. Alex immediately began to apologize and say that he was asking for forgiveness and can explain everything. After that, our hero stopped the torture and his servant said that he did not understand why our hero chose this country. Alex said that, for example, His Majesty invaded their territory or would demand to give up wealth and kingdoms of demons. Or he was simply in a bad mood. There are different reasons and he is interested in finding out the reason. The man thought for a bit, and said that he didn't have any reason, and he just decided that if he were a man, then he wanted to be at least. Our master's servant immediately folded his hands as a sign of respect and said that these words were worthy of the king of demons. And as soon as he arrived on earth, he immediately captured a huge kingdom and killed the king and also took his princess, and this is just a wonderful villainy because it is best for there is no such thing as a demon king. Alex said that an ordinary person or a high-ranking demon would not have thought of such a thing in everyday life and praised our hero with the words that he was a born demon king. Our hero was greedy for flattery and smiled inside thinking that this was the real truth. After this, his servant stated that if the great lord says that he is leaving the kingdom of demons and will not become their ruler, then all he can do is take our hero's son down and raise him as a new king. And on the appointed day, 20 years later, his son will become the Demiurge 666, and they will force him to appear on earth. After that, our hero smiled and said that he was not going to become a father so early at the age of 80. Our king's servant wanted to say something, but the man seemed to shoot at him with his energy. Deus, with an angry face, said that they simply decided to set him up. Meanwhile, the servant looked at this demon and thought that he was completely different, because the demonic field inside him was still growing. But he already had enormous power and 666 was undoubtedly different from his predecessors and perhaps this time, and not finally they could win. Meanwhile, our hero was talking about the fact that he was not going to be the king of demons because he stood out too much and decided to become a fighter for justice and a hero. The man was immediately surprised and asked what he was talking about, and our hero continued to explain that he would be the hero's assistant and will be with him, so others will recognize him. But at the same time he will be one step behind him so as not to stand out too much, and the last thing, everyone will begin to suspect that the hero's friend may be the king of demons. The man smiled and thought that he would reap the fruits of a demonic life, covering the dumb hero with his broad back. Deus laughed and said that this guy would do all the dirty work for him and the glory would go to Deus. Meanwhile Alex was lying at his feet and said that there was not even a smell of heroes nearby and how he was going to become his assistant. Deus immediately smiled and flew up, saying that then they would find the hero. After that, Alex asked what they would do with the princess, and the man said that he knew nothing and ordered his services to figure it out himself, to which Alex asked is he not at all interested in such a nice girl. Our hero replied that he was just bluffing. Meanwhile, someone was watching this whole incident through a glass ball, and they announced to an unknown person that 666 was born somehow defective and not only his origin leaves much to be desired, but his intellect is also not strong, to which the man replied that it would be even better because he only needed his strength, and he also thanked his seer for this information about our hero for his timely appearance. This unknown person turned out to be a girl who spoke out loud to herself and said that she was apologizing for borrowing the powers of these people for a short time, and she said that she was sure that she would be forgiven and that in the end everything was going strictly according to the intended scenario. A couple of days later Satan, along with his servant, lay on a cart and sang songs about how he would rather find a hero so that he would be his blunt shield. Meanwhile, his servant was talking about how they actually know how to fly and they don't need a cart because it only causes problems. But Satan asked what he was talking about. Satan took a deep breath and asked our servant, is he really a moron and plans to shine his demonic wings on every corner? After this, the servant pointed to the castle that they had just destroyed and asked our hero, is it really from the one who just destroyed the whole kingdom? But Satan just yawned and said that he doesn't care about all this. The servant calmed down a little and asked Satan if he was really going to become the hero's companion, to which our hero replied that you can be a hero even without blood and he just wants to enter the 2% of the richest people and enjoy life, and his friend the hero will mess with the monsters. Satan's servant said that even if they become the hero's companions, it will not be easy to enter the top 2%, to which Satan replied that here is the past king of demons and one of the great 7 of the demonic world, so you don't have to worry about anything at all, and the hero watches the greeting of the dragon like a chicken if they help him a little. The servant listened to all this, and said that it seemed to him that he would like to be a human but plans to use magic. Satan looked at his servant and asked loudly, "Why should he not use magic if he can?" After this, Satan asked his servant if the heroes had some kind of hierarchy or something like that, to which the servant replied that there was a system of ranks. Satan asked the services, "Is it really something like a rank or B rank?" To which Alex replied that it is. The servant began to tell that first comes D rank and such heroes are called dragon slayers. Satan yawned and asked, "Is this title given only to the one who kills the dragon?" And the servant replied that now, neutral dragons and demons and dragons that destroy the settlement towards people remained only in fairy tales. And this only means that the strength of this hero is enough to kill a dragon. After this, the servant continued to say that after this comes the G rank, which is called the giant killer. And this means that this hero is capable of slaying a giant. After him comes the L rank, and such heroes are already capable of killing Ilyich. Satan asked why there were so many and why they were named randomly, to which the servant replied that next everything will be in alphabetical order. Satan continued to lie on the hay and ask why they named these heroes out of the blue, and why everything looks even more boring what he imagined, to which the servant replied that he did not know and so decided to control the heroes. The servant also stated that the F rank comes last, and they are called fig heroes. The servant continued to explain and say that if such heroes became fruits, they would be rotten apples because they are simply worthless. Satan looked up at the sky and said that bullshit heroes sounded pretty sad and he wouldn't want to be like that. And the servant began to talk about the fact that the higher the heroes, the more support they can receive from the nobility, or occupy a more important post in the country, and the crappy heroes are only neglected. And also, the servant replied that such heroes are completely undesirable and people hope that they will all disappear soon, because the human world is very merciless. After that, Alex looked at his king and said that there is something more important than the ranks of heroes. Satan said that he already knows that in this world there is the power of blood, and the purer your blood, the stronger you are, and it was the first saviors of this world 66,580 years ago. The hero and priestess had pure blood, and now their children and their children's children have this blood. Therefore they continue their line of holy blood, and its quantity in families is carefully measured, and the purer the blood in the family, the stronger the aura available to its member, and the owner of the purest blood becomes a hero who fights with the king and wins, and this happens 665 times. Satan said that he would definitely not be 666, and said that it turns out that if you focus exclusively on the purity of the blood, then the owners of the least diluted get the highest ranks. The servant stated that this is so, but said that there are exceptions, but still usually it is she who determines the level of power. Satan yawned and said that there was something wrong with all this purebred nonsense, and as if there was some kind of bloody spoon, and he was stuck in an egg for a whole 80 years because of the war. Meanwhile, the servant continued to say that everyone takes pure blood as seriously as possible, and puts their life and honor on the line for its sake. Satan, meanwhile, just smiled and then yawned again and said that he actually didn't care about all this and he just wanted to talk about everything. But after that he added that usually, every time a hero and a demon king fights, and the war has been going on for 60,000 years just because of this one phrase. The servant on the cart said that this was a promise, and they had no right to break it. Satan looked at the sky and asked, can't they all just live a normal life, like this cart that moves very slowly and calmly? After that, Satan stood up sharply and said that he saw something. He asked his servant what it was and said that it looked like a leaf that was flying around, looked at it, and said that it was an ordinary butterfly. Our hero extended his finger, and a butterfly landed on his finger. He looked at it in surprise. But after that he sneezed, and the butterfly flew away. Then Satan asked the servant what it was just now, because something just flew at him and ruffled his hair, and the servant answered with a smile that it was just an ordinary wind. After this, Satan looked up and said that he saw something white from above, and it had been hanging on the ground for quite a long time and with its heads. And the servant replied that these were ordinary clouds. Then our hero covered his eyes and said that there is something else up there, round. If you look at it for a long time, it hurts your eyes. Tego answered that it was the usual sun. After that, our hero inhaled everything deeply and asked what this sweet aroma was that made his heart drag in, to which the servant replied that it was the smell of spring. Satan was silent for a while and asked the servant, "How long has he been living?" The man was silent for a while and replied that he was born after the first war, like all 7 dukes of the demon world. Satan looked at the clouds and said that it has been going on since the first war. This man comes up here every 100 years, and this is a great time, because this place, which is called the surface, is incredibly beautiful. After that, Satan said that the past demon kings there had probably never experienced such feelings. And our hero said that if everything had been as they had planned, he would have remained underground for another 20 years and would have died at the hands of a hero whom he had never even met before. Satan said with a smile that he was very glad that he was able to escape from this vicious circle. After that, he smiled and said that the demon king is a work that should not exist, and laughed. The servant did not answer anything. Meanwhile, our hero lay down on the hay and said that he planned to sleep a little and asked not to wake him. He also said this so that they would wake him up when they finally arrived, and asked him to accept the fact that if he decides to quietly drag him into the demon world, then they will both die. The servant said that she understood everything and wished Satan pleasant things. After a couple of hours, the servant turned and looked at his king and said that they had finally arrived. The man immediately raised his head and said that he did not expect it to be so quickly. The servant began to explain that the place they arrived in is not very active, and there is also little trade here, and there are no people nearby, so it is literally a sample of the ordinary, and the village is called Zorix. Our hero smiled and asked how things were going with the heroes, to which the servant replied that there are only 2 families of the first A rank, but they are already quite close to the GR rank, and another one is Fig. Satan was surprised to discover that in such a place there was not even a dragon slayer, and the servant immediately replied that if every castle had heroes with such a rank, then their army of demons would not even think about rising to the surface. The hero asked if this rank was really that strong, and was frightened and replied that it was. Satan looked at the ordinary people who were discussing that one of the castles nearby had recently been attacked by a dragon, and it had not even been caught yet, so the men warned the women not to even think about approaching this castle, and someone said that according to rumors, this castle burned to the ground. The girls who heard this said that according to rumors, dragons became extinct many, many years ago. And someone began to say that it turns out that the age of dragons is coming again, and if the legends do not lie, then real hell awaits them. Then Satan looked at his servant, and stated that he had heard from him that dragons were neutral, and the servant said that for some reason it seemed so to him. But the last time he was on the surface was 80 years ago, and a lot could have changed during that time. Meanwhile, people were discussing that they needed to quickly notify the saints about this, and they should send a dragon slayer hero here. After this, the servant looked at his king and said that they had arrived at the best hotel in this district and could stay here, and our hero said that they still had no choice and asked them to stop calling him king or lord, and it was better to just call him master. The servant did not understand the last word, and Satan declared that he should now be called master. And then he looked at his servant, and said that it was time for him to go and pay for their rooms. As soon as the servant entered, the head of this tavern greeted him, and said that he was very glad to see our guests in the golden tent. The servant smiled and asked this gentleman to give him a penthouse, because his master is a very picky person. Meanwhile, the owner of this hotel was angry because our heroes were wearing the clothes of some Selyuks, and he thought that they were clearly not worthy of a penthouse, and said that our heroes probably came from distant lands, and did not know that the penthouse was quite expensive. After that, the servant threw such a treasure chest on the floor and said that money was not a problem for them. The old man immediately started shouting at his servant, and asking why he wasn't accompanying these clients yet. The guy immediately ran up and fell to the ground, saying that it was his mistake, and immediately apologized. Meanwhile, the old man asked him to move quickly and serve these dear guests. The guy said with a smile that he welcomes such wonderful guests to his hotel. He also said that his name was Zeke, and meanwhile his nose was bleeding after the fall, and he said that he would take them rich, so he asked them to just follow him. The man raised a heavy chest and said that recently, because of the news that the Sunset Dragon had returned, it was now quite noisy. After all, no one could have thought that a legendary dragon would appear, but he immediately added that there is no need to worry about it because a famous one lives in their village A rank family, and this is quite encouraging. And after that, The man opened the door of the room and said that the gentleman can be located right here, and this is the pride of their hotel. The man said that, to be honest, this is the first time he has met such distinguished guests, and said that he does not know whether the service will satisfy them, but he will do everything in his power, so he asks them not to hesitate to contact him at any time. Satan looked at this guy and said that he definitely felt that there was blood in him. The man wanted to answer something, but he immediately began to stutter, and Satan said that now he understands why this guy feels completely different. After this, Satan began to say that despite the fact that he is a blood carrier, he is in very bad shape. Moreover, he works in such a place, and it turns out that he is from the second family, which is called Fig, and in his family there have been entire generations of blood purity below ground level. After that, Satan looked him straight in the eye and asked how this guy is doing with the purity of his blood. The man immediately blushed and smiled and said that unfortunately he had the lowest rank. Immediately after these words, the roof of the hotel was destroyed, and everyone saw a huge dragon in front of them. The women and children immediately began to run away, and the men also did not lag behind them. Meanwhile, Zeke shouted that a dragon had attacked them. After that, he looked at the gentleman and said that they urgently needed to run away. Satan just smiled and said that before that his servant had said that dragons were neutral. His servant immediately got angry and said that he was just clarifying that he was not sure. Zeke tried to reach out to our heroes, and meanwhile Satan finally stopped laughing and told the secretary that he would support the guy who works in this hotel on the path of becoming a hero. Satan also said that he was looking for a hero in any case, and it was just fate that they were here at such a right moment. So he asked the guy to accept his offer, and he would give him weak riches that I never dreamed of, even his father, and he would also save him from that damned Fig hero brand. Satan looked him straight in the eyes and asked this hero whether he wanted to live the rest of his days as a Frank who had never even held a sword in his hands, or would he go with him and change his fate because such a chance is given only once in life? The guy looked at all this and couldn't believe his ears and eyes, but inside he remembered that all his life he had heard that the purity of his blood was so low that it was simply ridiculous. And he also heard how people don't understand why there are such things in the factory. Children, after all, they will grow up to be a disgrace anyway, and they will be lucky if they don't die of hunger. The man remembered all these words that he had heard during his life, and immediately fell to his knees in front of Satan, asking him to bestow his support on this young man. He also said that despite his rank, he would still make absolutely every effort that he could and even more. He said that he swears that this man will not regret giving him a chance. With tears in his eyes, the guy said that he was even ready to give his soul for such a chance. Satan said that he planned to claim his soul anyway, so this is even better. After that, Satan smiled and said that this would be their debut and it was time for them to hunt the dragon. And Zeke, with a nervous voice, asked shouldn't they start some goblins, and Satan and his servant here laughed after hearing these words. After that, Satan directed his hand at this guy and said that now they will conclude a contract. After that, fire and flames ignited in front of them, forming a contract in which Satan was party A, and Zeke, the hero of Frang, was side B. The conditions stated that Zeke would have to obey the orders of Satan, and also choose him as his companion in heroic exploits. It was also indicated that Satan himself will decide how long the contract will last and can terminate it himself. And all glory and riches will belong to Satan, and he himself will decide whether to transfer them to Zeke. Zeke looked at all these words and thought that this contract was not completely honest. After this, Satan smiled and told his hero to say his name if he agreed and the contract would be concluded. The man took another look at this contract, and screamed his name at the top of his lungs. After that, Satan smiled and raised his finger up and said that today will be their debut, and they will kill this dragon. Suddenly, the servant looked at Satan and said that ordinary people cannot kill the dragon. Satan immediately smiled and said that because of this, he would simply pretend to kill and Satan and his servants would do the rest. Also, Satan said that according to the plan, Alex will have to get close to the dragon by slightly beating it, and then he will have to throw it in front of the hero's face, and the hero will, in turn, have to swing the ball at the falling dragon, and for all spectators it will look like this, as if he had come and killed the attacking dragon. Zeke listened to all this. I couldn't believe my ears because this plan sounded very strange. The servant looked at his king and said that people might find it suspicious that such a hero would just take and defeat a dragon, and besides, the role of a D-rank companion would not allow Satan to live peacefully in this world. After that, Satan and his friend smiled and looked at the hero, who was surprised and asked why they were looking at him so much. Satan smiled and took the pan, made 2 holes in it, and put it on his head, and said that a masked hero had now appeared. Instead of a mask there was a pan with holes, and instead of a cloak he had his clothes made from a uniform. Satan also said that the hero must be in a cloak and shorts, and now no one will know about him. The unexpected appearance of a mysterious game sounds very cool. Satan's servant smiled and said that in that case it was time for him to go and kill the dragon. After this, Satan said that it was time for them to go down with his hero. The man blushed all over and asked, "Does he really need to look so stupid to fight a dragon?" But after that, Satan kicked the mop into his hands and told the hero not to forget his holy sword. Satan smiled and said that our hero will just have to stand there and hold this swap, and when the dragon is right in front of him, he will have to kill him, and then the weak will be provided with riches beyond even his wildest dreams. At this moment, Zeke felt something strange that he could not understand now, but suddenly he clenched his fist and seemed able to destroy everything in his path. He had a mad desire, the root of which was something in the blood, the instincts of heroes sleeping in his hemoglobin. The hero's blood yearned to tear the demon king standing next to him into pieces. However, in the head of Zeke, who did not know about this, the words were spinning that looking into the eyes of Satan, he was filled with courage, as if he could do anything. After that, he ran with a crazy rose to pretend that he was killing the dragon. People on the street were trying to escape this city and begging for someone to come and save them. Meanwhile, the dragon flew and burned the entire city. At the top of the church, meanwhile, a remnant servant appeared, standing elegantly on the cross and looking at all the people. Suddenly the dragon noticed his gaze and decided to head towards this man to kill him. But Satan's servant took on his true form and took out the rest of his hands. After that, he jumped on the dragon in order to kill it. Once on his neck, the man swung and struck at his scales. After some time, he tore it into pieces and was able to get to the dragon's heart. Then his hands clasped this heart, which was beating like crazy. After this, the servant said that now the heart of the dragon is in his hands. Therefore, he will have to obey, and first he asks answer the question, why did the dragon always fly? Because there is peace between people and dragons. The dragon did not answer, and in the meantime, the servant of Satan noticed that his body was engulfed in some kind of curse, and the dragon himself did not speak clearly. The servant would have listened to all this and asked the dragon how a dragon like him could know such a dirty thing, and asked what kind of parasites were on him, and he also said that there was clearly something wrong here. Meanwhile, our hero stood with the sword in his hands, and was ready to pretend that he was killing this dragon. He looked up and saw that the children were watching him, with thoughts about why he wasn't hiding. Does this guy really want to fight the dragon alone? They also said that in such an outfit he looks more like a pervert, which greatly embarrassed the hero. He thought inside that this was the real Sadavaya, and fear and embarrassment were mixed in his stomach. Meanwhile, Satan waved his hand to the hero, saying that this guy in the mask should go save this city. Everyone else immediately heard that Satan called him a hero and decided that he really was a hero and began to thank him for such courage. The guy was still embarrassed, but he grabbed his mop with both hands, thinking about what it was. A chance only comes at once in life and he shouldn't miss it. Meanwhile, Satan's servant sat on the dragon with the thought that most likely this dragon would be very difficult to control, and in this case he had no choice but to use his trump card. He cast a spell in demonic language, and 100 demonic hands immediately burst out of his back. They all grabbed this dragon and began to control its actions. After that, with one of his hands he pierced the heart of this dragon. Suddenly, just before his death, the dragon finally spoke in normal language, telling them to get ready because the dragon saw that the one who should be the honey had returned. Immediately after this, unknown parasites began to attack Satan's servant. He immediately realized what this was all about and looked at the purple tentacles. Satan, meanwhile, looked into the sky at the dragon and thought what his servant was doing there, and why he did not come down for so long, because the audience had been waiting for quite a long time. He looked at all this and picked his nose with the thoughts that his servant decided to talk this dragon to death, or in another case, he simply could not kill him, which would be very strange. After some time, the dragon finally began to fly towards our heroes, and Satan asked his hero to be ready because the dragon was approaching. Satan also told our hero to choose the right moment and cut with all his might. The hero looked at this dragon and how it was flying at full speed straight at the hero, and said that he did not want to be touched. Satan smiled and swore on his own name that he would not let this guy die, no matter what happened. The heroic blood in the veins of this guy immediately began to actively move and fill him with strength and determination. After that, he took the necessary stance and said that he would now use the radiance of the moon, the first technique. Meanwhile, the servant resisted the parasite that was trying to consume his body. He thought that I was trying and that these problems were stressing him out a little. He noticed that his body was starting to weaken. So he decided to use 100 demonic arms. After that, he began to wave them in all directions to get rid of this terrible parasite. Finally, when the parasite became weaker, he got scared and immediately grabbed him by the head and tried to pull him away from himself. Satan watched all this and thought that his friend was gradually descending, but still moving somehow too strange. Satan smiled and thought that it would be nice if his servant slowed down, because otherwise their hero would be scattered along the street. The servant, meanwhile, continued to fight with this parasite, and at the same time control the dragon, which he was not very good at. Meanwhile, the hero incredibly was afraid of fear with the thought that the dragon was approaching and had almost killed him. Satan came down from here and called his servant, saying that he was doing something strange and it was time to slow down. But as soon as he looked at this dragon, he saw that his servant was desperately fighting with an unknown purple parasite. The hero, meanwhile, held Slava as tightly as possible, with the thought that no matter what happens, he is still not going to move and will kill this dragon with one blow. He immediately remembered how, as a child, he was taught the first technique, the radiance of the moon. His father smiled and said that it was a secret sword art that was passed down from generation to generation in the family, and he also said that his son should learn it before the demon army invades again. The boy told his father that the neighboring children were telling him that he could not participate in the war with the demon king because their family was too weak. The man smiled and said that it doesn't matter what others say because blood flows in their family's veins. The holy blood is a hero, and without a doubt, his son will become a wonderful hero and will also take part in the war. The man cleared his throat and said that the hero should study very nicely. The boy smiled and said that he did just that. At the right moment, the hero swung a mop and said that he would now use his ancient family technique. He closed his eyes because he was afraid that he might die now. But as soon as he opened them, he saw that he was covered in blue blood. Looking around, he saw that there was literally nothing left of the dragon. All the residents immediately began to rejoice and triumphantly talk about the fact that this hero was able to defeat the dragon, which means that he was sent by God. Meanwhile, Satan shouted that it was time for this hero to quickly change clothes and hide. The hero immediately began to run away. Meanwhile, the servant stood at the top of the church and his face was clearly struck by unknown magic. He looked at the dead dragon and remembered his last words that the one who should be dead would soon return. The next morning, Satan woke up and said that he slept incredibly well. Meanwhile, his servant was surprised that Satan got up so early and offered him coffee. The servant approached Satan, dressed like a butler, and said that they say that people's morning begins with coffee. Suddenly, a hero burst into the room and turned to his master and said that they had problems. The guy with a smile on his face said that all the residents are actively looking for the masked hero and are constantly discussing that they want to make him the first hero in the village. Satan looked at what this hero was wearing and asked what happened to his clothes. The guy smiled and said that since the village had been in ruins since yesterday, he helped with the clearing this morning, and the work paid quite well. Satan took the first sip of coffee and said that he understood everything and everything was going according to his plan. After that, he looked up and said that he incredibly liked waking up under the invigorating rays of the sun and enjoying aromatic coffee. He thought a little and said that in the morning on the surface it is many times better than underground. The butler said that this coffee is made from the tongue and left eye of the dragon, so he is very glad that this taste satisfied Satan. The street was in full swing, and everyone was trying to quickly put the city in order after the terrible defeat. Our hero again went to help. With a smile on his face, they loaded him with stones and told him to finish quickly because there was still a lot of work. Satan watched all this and wondered why these people are trying so hard to restore their village. He also noticed that even this guy, whom they consider to be their personal hero, works tirelessly. The servant smiled and said that he spoke with this guy yesterday, and he said that he had been working since childhood and constantly plowed, and his family was poor, and raising a hero is not cheap. So washing, cleaning, chopping wood and digging graves, that's all he did, and it's easier to list than what jobs he did not work at. The Demon King listened to all this, and the servant continued to talk about how this guy even managed to work in an underground bar. Meanwhile, Satan listened to all this and said that he had already decided everything. They had finally found a hero, and traveling just like that is boring, so they will start their plan in this village, and although it is small and insignificant, it somehow managed to hook Satan. After that, Satan smiled and said that it was time for him to go, and this hero must work. The servant asked where they would go, and Satan replied that they would sell dragon skin because it is used to create equipment, and is then very expensive. The servant said that the hero's control took everything at night. After that, the servant said that the corpses of dragons are very heavy and ordinary people certainly cannot carry them away. Satan immediately began to get angry, and say that they did not receive anything at all for killing this dragon. After that, Satan stopped a little and told his servant that right now they would go to control the hero in order to destroy him. The servant looked at his master and said that this was a bad idea. But Satan had already given up on all this and said that the control of the heroes is their main base, and they must destroy it. The servant immediately stated that no matter how much more master he is, he will not be able to defeat them all alone. And if they also realize that he is the king of demons, then everything will be over. The servant was silent for a while and said that before this the master wanted to become the hero's companion. The servant immediately realized that he needed to say that in the human world, in order to become a hero, you need to register with the department, and if they destroy him now, then no one will recognize their hero. After that, the Demon King thought a little and said that in this case there was no hurry, and the servant was happy that he had just prevented the destruction of the demon race. Satan looked at his servant, and replied that in this case they need to go and make up for the losses at the expense of the neighboring party. The servant immediately apologized and reminded his master that he now wants to be a man, and Satan said that he will become one tomorrow, and said that it's time will head to a neighboring country. The servant thought a little, and a couple of hours later, when they were already heading to another country, he asked if it seemed to Satan that enjoying the surface was already enough, and it was time to go back, because the demon world awaits the return of its king. And until that day there are only 20 years left, and they can waste time, and the guys need to quickly learn the art of the Demon King in order to take over the world. Satan smiled and said that this was not his problem, and he did not see a single reason to do this only because someone else wanted it. The servant looked into the distance, and said that the Demon King would appear and attack the human world. He was silent for a while and added that the phrase had become so familiar that no one even considered it something forced anymore, and 665 kings, before our hero, and the whole world demons as well as people who will be attacked are as natural as breathing for all of them. Satan smiled and said close that he would work as he wanted because otherwise God would not be needed, and he also added that his servant should come to terms with the fact that there would be no more Demon King and think about it. The servant immediately looked at Satan and shouted that in this case he should at least make a child who can become 666 king, and it doesn't even matter who the girl is. Satan asked in surprise how it didn't matter, and how his servant looked at him to blurt out that, let's add that the word of a demon is immediately visible in it. The servant looked at our Demon King and said that he would not leave until he gave up an heir who could be taken down. The Demon King said that in this case he would have to accompany him forever as a servant. The king's servant smiled and said that in this case he could find him a girl who would suit him. The Demon King warned his East that if he talks about marriage again, he will personally destroy the entire world of demons and leave no stone unturned. After this, Satan asked how it even works. The servant turned in surprise and asked what exactly Satan was talking about. Satan was a little embarrassed, and asked if it would be possible to do this with the princess they met. The servant asked, is the Demon King really talking about sex? And the Demon King immediately began to get angry and say that he was just talking about pregnancy, and how can a person get pregnant from demons? The servant smiled and said that of course this can happen, and added that the method of reproduction in humans and demons is identical, and usually in human men the seed is produced in the testicles before eruption. and as soon as the sperm enter the female uterus, one of them penetrates the egg and the fetus ripens from 37 to 42 weeks. Satan said he wanted to ignore sex education. He also added that if the demon king wants, he himself can make demonic sperm automatically flow into others, so that any direct interaction will lead to pregnancy with a 99% chance. And added that in the event the sun drops to 50 and from a simple smack the possibility only 25% get pregnant. Satan looked at his servant in surprise and asked, "Is it really possible to get pregnant from an ordinary kiss?" And he raised his finger up and said that you can get pregnant simply if the girl is held by someone's hand, like the demon king. The guy immediately lay down on the hay and said that this body seemed to be created for reproduction. After that, he said that the more he learns about his body, the less he likes it because he already understands that the purpose of this body is to kill and reproduce. The servant looked at our hero and declared that his body was blessed, and he was the hope and salvation of the entire world of demons, and this was the ideal body given by the demon king. Meanwhile, said that he is just a piece that is created again every 100 years and he does not like this feeling of many expectations placed upon him. After which he looked at the servant and asked what he thought about it. The servant wanted to answer, but he stopped because he and Satan noticed that to the right of them a girl was running away from hundreds of men on horses. When they looked closer, they noticed that it was not just a man, but some huge monsters and a girl who looked like a nun and was running with all her might. The girl saw our hero's cart and, with tears in her eyes, began to beg for salvation, saying that bandits from the mountains were chasing her. The servant said that the beautiful lady was in trouble and asked his master if he would go to save her, to which Satan said that he did not understand why he should do this, and the servant replied that in this case something good could happen. The demon king thought for a moment, and said that this all looked rather suspicious. The guy said that the girl suddenly ran in their direction, with screams, to which the servant replied that this is a common phenomenon, which is called a beauty asking to be saved from being chased. Satan, meanwhile, continued to argue that there was nothing around them, so it was not clear where they came from, and even if they took them out of the forest, it was too far to get to it, and what was more important. Satan looked at her servant, and asked if he thought it was too suspicious that all these mountain bandits had never noticed the cart during the entire chase, and continued to run just after this girl. After this, Satan looked at his servant and asked if his servant really built all this himself, because he wanted, with the help of the girl, to conceive his heir. His servant smiled and said that in the demon kingdom he was considered the greatest strategist, and would never approve of such nonsense. Meanwhile, the girl had already run up as close as possible to the cart, and took hold of it, asking for help. She called Satan a hero and asked him to help her get rid of these bandits with tears in her eyes. The guy said that he is actually not a hero, but just his assistant, and cannot help in any way. The girl cried again and said that it didn't matter to her who it would be, a hero or an assistant, she was still asking for help because the bandits were already very close. After that, the demon king smiled and said that they were actually a party of a high mass and hunting dragons was their destiny, so it was not proper for them to dirty their hands with both incomprehensible bandits from the mountain. The girl smiled evilly and wiped away her tears and said that this guy was quite stuffy. Satan heard this and pointed his finger at her, and said that she had just sworn. The girl began to cry again, and said that she was very much asking the hero's assistant to do a favor for weak young girls. Satan did not give up and tried to accuse her of lying, and meanwhile a huge axe hit near him. He was thrown by one of the mountain bandits, who said with a smile that they should run away from here as quickly as possible along with their worthless cart if they were to live. He said that now his beautiful carriage is broken and because of this he needs to be punished. He looked at the bandit and ordered him to burn with an eternal flame. His body was immediately enveloped in purple flames, and he began to fight with himself on the ground, and says that it is very hot. The others looked at him in surprise and our hero declared that it would never be possible to put him out. After that, Satan said that no matter who tried, no matter what by magic they used, this man would never go out and die again, and now his fate was to burn for eternity in agony. Then Satan looked at everyone else and asked, "Doesn't anyone want to keep company?" They immediately began to run away and say that they were mistaken and apologized for disturbing this man. The girl immediately smiled and thanked our hero, to which he said that she should now disappear from his eyes. But the girl said that the bandits had captured her temple. The girl said with a smile that they captured this temple, and also took all the priestesses as slaves and collected holy relics, so she asks to know them and free the temple. Satan yawned and said that this was actually not a level and he definitely wouldn't do something like that. After that, he ordered his servants to quickly leave here, and the servant immediately said that he would listen to his master. Suddenly the girl realized that she needed to say something else and asked if they were talking about dragons. Then most likely they are companions of another, naked hero, and stated that their temple was captured by bandits. And this temple stands on a dragon and the top of the god of dragons himself, and this is the true temple of the golden dragon. Therefore, if they help get rid of them, then they will reward them with the real helmet of the golden dragon. An hour later, they had already arrived at the right place and began to climb the mountain, and our hero's servant asked his master to just fly there and not walk, to which Satan replied that he was actually not the king of the demons anymore, and they would get there on foot. In this case, the man asked to at least carry the master on his back as expected, because in this position his hips were about to fall apart, to which Satan said that the question was at stake in the honor of the kingdom of demons, and the servant immediately reminded him that he's no longer a king. Pouring profuse sweat, the man said that it still looked too suspicious. He looked at the girl and said that she had already been running for half an hour and was not tired at all. He said that the mountain is too steep and that the girl has an ordinary human body and cannot survive such strong loads. Satan smiled and said that he absolutely didn't care who this girl was. And the servant looked at his master and asked what he was talking about, to which Satan replied that he had no idea what was on her mind. Well, if she did, he would have to take him off scalp from her head, and defiantly put it on herself. He also said that he was surprised when the girl talked about the golden dragon because he had not thought before that dragons could worship some kind of golden god. The servant immediately began to explain that everything was different, and it was like the demon realm, where the demon king was worshipped, and the true golden dragon was at the top of the hierarchy of all dragons and was not a deity. Because for demons, for dragons and for people, for all living beings in this world there is only one God, and this is the Creator. Satan looked up and decided to say that it turns out that people are this God's favorites, and demons and dragons are just for extras. The servant said they prayed it so that Satan would not doubt, because God is the only truth and perfect love in this world, and if they could take the horse blessed by God's light, then the demons would clearly be the favorites. The servant, meanwhile, was already barely walking, and our hero said that this is a very perverted way of expressing love. Finally, they arrived, and the servant immediately fell exhausted, and Satan, meanwhile, stood on him and said that he was grateful for the fact that they gave him a ride. After that, he decided to step on the ground, and accidentally walked over the head of the servant, calling him a rag that fizzled out so quickly. After that, the man looked at the temple and said that he expected that on the way back they would go the same way. After that, they went inside the temple, and our hero greeted the priestess, saying that he did not see bandits anywhere and the helmet of the golden dragon, so he asked to give it while he was in the mood. The servant, meanwhile, with great shortness of breath, said that he had a bad feeling about this place. They began to peer into the darkness, and suddenly the dragon opened his eye and illuminated the room with a golden color. And the priestess said with a smile that the heroes had come a very long way, and apparently the lackey's intuition was much better than that of the demon king. Satan smiled and said that the girl looked like the same bandit who sat in the temple, and asked what did I do with the helmet? The girl looked at Satan and asked how dare he open his mouth. Doesn't he understand what position he is in? And she immediately advised him to bow his head in front of them. The girl's eyes lit up and she said that the god of all dragons is the law, and the mother of dragons, the one to whom the god of dragons obeys, the only true golden dragon, is the golden dragon. The servant immediately looked at the demon king, and declared that the true golden dragon was in front of them, and they had been lured into a trap. The girl began to laugh and ask our heroes if they were surprised that she exceeded all their expectations, after which she called them stupid mortals and clearly made it clear that she did not understand who she was talking to. The girl looked down at them and said that they could start begging for mercy, and maybe she was laughing. Our guy repeated the words she said and said that it sounded great. The girl was glad that he had finally gotten enough of everything, and said that as a sign of repentance for our heroes, she was entrusting them with a request. Meanwhile, Satan said that he wasn't talking about that at all, and just said that the mother of dragons sounds cool and he also wants some kind of cool nickname. After that, our hero looked at his servant, and said that every time he thought that something was missing in his presentation, and asked his servant what other titles could he attribute to himself. The girl clearly tensed and coughed loudly, telling them to pay attention to her. After that, she got angry and threatened them to stop talking nonsense, and also said that now they should bow down and beg for forgiveness. Don't they feel guilty? Our hero said that he does not remember that he crossed paths with this girl somewhere. The woman looked at him and, pointing her finger, said that they killed a dragon yesterday, and she is the mother of all dragons, which means that they killed her child. The guy laughed and said, did she really understand the fuss over such nonsense? The girl stamped her foot on the floor, and at that very second she found herself right in front of our hero's face. She asked with a smile, does he think this is nonsense? After this, the girl announced that now she is not in her golden jade kingdom, and from here they will not be able to escape. And she also stated that even if he were the demon king, he would not be able to defeat her in this space. The servant immediately began to tell our hero that if they are in the golden jade kingdom, then they should definitely leave because even Satan cannot defeat her in this battle. The girl smiled and said that our hero's lackey was not stupid at all. Then she decided to reveal all her cards and said that she knew that now the 666th demon king was standing in front of her, and he must kneel. Meanwhile, Satan asked her if she continued to behave this way even after she found out who he was. He smiled and said that even if she is a true golden dragon, he can still take her face, and he also told her to prepare because now he will rip off her skin and will do it very slowly. The girl wanted to say that he did not dare talk to her like that, but he immediately put his finger to the lips of the mother of dragons and asked for silence. After that, he looked her straight in the eyes and said that the girl must apologize for her lies. She looked at him with her surprised face and asked what he was even talking about. The guy put his hands in his pockets and said that he would be honest with her, and he came to the surface not to cause outrage. And she knows this. He only wanted to live among people like the hero's companion and watch them all from behind the shadows. And with such thoughts he arrived in the village, and then a dragon crawled out of nowhere, burning and destroying everything in its path. The guy said, looking straight into her eyes, that he had no choice but to kill him because he acted in self-defense, and the girl at that time did not even bother to show her face. But immediately after that she decided to play priestess, and to deceive the demon king. And then the theatrics began with these golden dragons. He once again looked her straight in the eyes and said did she really think that he would just resign himself and beg the lady goddess for forgiveness or something like that. He continued to ask her, does she really think that if she is a former being, then she can do anything, and asked are all dragons like this? The servant immediately joined in and said that his master was right, and to think that you can do anything simply because you have the strength to do it is a huge delusion. The girl, meanwhile, could not believe her ears that these two were scolding her. And the servant said that it is obvious that anyone will fight for their lives, and added that it was the dragons who were the party that violated the peace treaty, and therefore they should ask for an apology. Satan said that his servant was right, and looked at the girl to ask, did she deserve to ask for forgiveness? He also began to make faces and say that it is parents who are often the root of problems. When it comes to difficult children, the girl began to make excuses and say that she cannot be called a real parent, and she is rather a metaphorical mother of dragons. After this, the servant looked at her and asked is she really trying to avoid responsibility, and wants to enjoy the rights of a goddess, but at the same time refuses the responsibility that they bear? Satan continued to say that such people always blame their children for all the problems. However, if you dig deeper, it turns out that the problem is in the parents themselves, because they do not pay even a drop of attention to their offspring when they start to row, and then they also take the children aside and their reputation. All parents fall because of a girl like this. The servant added that one cannot turn a blind eye to this incident, and as a representative of the dragons and as a true golden dragon, she must take the responsibility to apologize and admit that the dragons violated the peace treaty. All this nonsense caused the dragon goddess to bleed from her ears. She grabbed her head and said that something was wrong here, and why was she the only one to blame for everything? Satan and his servants immediately turned around and said that only she was to blame, and told her to quickly let them out of this jade closet, or whatever she called it. The girl asked them to stop at least for a second and try to listen to her requests if they ended up here anyway. Satan looked at her and said that first she needed to at least apologize and maybe they would listen to her request. The girl hesitated and the guy immediately turned around and said that if she doesn't want to apologize, then he doesn't care. Suddenly the girl asked them to stop and look down, and said that she was very sorry. After that, Satan came up to her and patted her head. He said with a smile that it turned out so, but if he insists on leaving the dragons, then he accepts her apology. The girl tensed up and told her that this was looking more and more like nonsense. But she said that she was still a generous goddess, so forgive me. Satan smiled and called the girl a lizard, saying that he was ready to listen to her request. The girl's face immediately changed and she said that if we explain it in a nutshell, then our heroes must hunt dragons. Our hero began to laugh and say, "Is the mother of dragons asking the demon king to kill everyone who is like children to her?" After that, he began to beat her, not with all his might, and to say that she was a complete fool if she thought that he would believe in this because it was an obvious trap. The servant looked at them and asked the dragon goddess, "Is it really all because of the purple parasites?" The servant immediately began to say that there was something in the dragon's body, and the thing looked like parasites, and it felt like it had taken control of the dragon's mind. The mother of dragons immediately said that this is the reason and there is now a split in their world of dragons, and this is the fault of the extremist bastards who oppose peace with people, and that dragon yesterday was just a bargaining chip for these radical outgrowths. The mother of dragons looked up and said that it was very difficult to worry about the death of her loved ones at the hands of people. She also added that she was already sick of hunting her children for materials to create weapons, and those who had experienced such things gathered together, and now represent themselves as extremists, since all three sides must be neutral. The mother of dragons sadly said that they, blinded by rage, used an unknown but extremely powerful magic that enslaved those living in the world and set them on the village to reignite the war between people and dragons. The girl sadly said that this is the only reason why she wants to stop her children who have strayed from her upbringing. Satan said that he understood her thoughts and the girl was not talking about hunting dragons, but in fact asked to save peace-loving dragons from death while they were controlled by parasites planted by extremists, or something like that. The girl said that everything was true, and Satan asked her what he would get in return. The guy said that if he gives something away, he must get something in return and he won't work any other way. The girl looked at him with a serious look and asked what he wanted. The guy took out his palm and showed that he wanted as many as 5 dragon scales. He immediately said that everyone knows that weapons made from dragon scales are the best, so he wants as many as 5 of them. He also said that equipment forged in the flames of dragons costs more than 1,000 gold on the market. The girl smiled and said that he was completely insolent. The guy snapped his fingers and said that she could think as she wanted, but then a contract appeared in front of her face, which stated that he undertakes to complete the task about the extremists, and hand them over to the golden dragon. However, he must receive 5 dragon scales for each dragon, and weapon worth at least 1,000 gold will be paid the next morning after completing the task, and in case of violation, the mother of dragons will become the slave of the demon king. After that, he kisses and said that she can read it and familiarize herself in full, and the contract will come into force as soon as she says her name, and this is a contract with a demon, so it's better not to be cunning because her soul is at stake. The girl then said that she knew all the rules and shouted the name Golden Dragon. Satan smiled and said that the contract was concluded. After that, he turned around and told the girl to quickly open the doors because he wanted to deal with this as quickly as possible. But suddenly the dragon stopped him and declared that he must capture all the dragons alive, because she would no longer allow new deaths. As soon as they left the temple, our hero laughed and said that it turned out even better than he expected. But suddenly he tried to go back to the temple and shouted the name of the mother of dragons. The servant asked what was the matter and our hero replied that he forgot to pick up his helmet, which they had been coming here for so long. After that, the man shouted to all the mountains that one day he would tear off her head. Friends, if you want me to quickly make the second part of the manhwa you like, or you just want to support me, then you can use the super thank you function. I will be glad for any amount, since I spend several weeks creating one manhwa recap, and sometimes even that doesn't pay off. And thank you to those who watched my videos to the end, you are invaluable. The next day, the Demon King explained to his servant that he was going to become an arms dealer. The servant immediately became furious and asked Satan if he had decided to abandon the demon kingdom and dump it on the surface just to sell a couple of knives. Zeke tried to hold the servant and smooth out the corners in this situation. The demon king immediately got angry and said that the locals hunt dragons for materials, and they don't even think about it, and they don't have any business sense. After that, Deus smiled and daydreamed, saying that the monopoly on dragon scales and weapons provided by a true golden dragon, these are just fabulous conditions, and he immediately understood it all. So he stated that with such a plan, they will quickly be able to get rich and enter the top of the richest people in the world, and when they catch a couple of dragons, they will get a bunch of weapons in bulk, and it's just easy money. Deus smiled and said that in a world where war is constantly going on, this is a win-win idea. But the servant immediately declared that without the demon king there would be no wars and our hero needs to control himself. After that, Deus looked at her servant and asked, "Has Alex forgotten who he is?" Deus began to say that the arms trade is only a way to earn money for his real plan and he is not going to spend his whole life plowing. He also stated that the creation of those who control everything from the shadows and from the depths will own all the weapons in this world. Alex said that deep down he hoped that he was not mistaken, and now he sees it because he realized that the Demon King is not going to lead his world. After that, Deus smiled and told Alex to quickly take the hero, and they were looking for a suitable place for a shop, after which they got scared, trying to immediately take the hero in his arms and ran. He said that this would be done. Meanwhile, Deus was thinking that he was going to engage in the arms trade only in order to become the greatest landowner in the whole world in the future, and inside he was glad that his servants were so trusting. The next morning, Deus lay on his bed and looked at the sun, thinking that he finally got rid of his problems with money and found a stupid hero. So he thinks that this is enough and now he just needs to do nothing and become rich. However, inside he had a strange feeling of emptiness, and he was thinking about whether he would really feel better if he slaughtered everyone in this village. Suddenly, inside ourselves, our hero heard a voice that said, "When so many demon kings must slaughter everyone and destroy this world, rape women and enslave men to turn the surface into hell." A voice inside said that in case of victory, Deus could break out of the cycle of centuries-long rebirths in the world of demons who do not know the sun. But then, Deus calmed himself down and asked his inner voice to shut up because he wanted to sleep. The next morning, the servant called his master and said that they had arrived and they would open their trading post in this place because the previous owners died during the dragon attack, so it was easy to appropriate it for themselves. And he said that it looks quite good. After that he began to pull himself up and say that his servant is so fast that he doesn't even allow him to sleep if he is entrusted with some task. Alex smiled and said that when he heard about the true plan, he was too inspired and could not calm down. She and the hero said that it was time for them to finally get down to business with this very true plan. Alex looked up and said that the shop looked pretty good, and added that if they asked their hero here to take care of everything, they could save on labor. Deus looked at her servant and asked if he could really renovate the building, to which Alex replied that this guy said that he had already worked as a carpenter. The Demon King thought for a while and said that this guy has quite a lot of skills at such a young age. After that, he looked at Alex and stated that he had long wanted to ask about the purity of blood and find out whether it is inherited because as far as he knows, even almost pure-blooded parents can give birth to a fig hero. The servant said that this could well be the case, but also stated that there are many examples of the opposite, when the children of the hero and priestess of rank F became incredibly strong, to which Deus said that it was all just a matter of chance. After that, he thought a little and said that in this case, even such heroes have hope, and they should not receive their rank just because they were born into some family. Alex looked at his master and said that in fact things are a little more complicated because talent is not inherited. But wealth is very even in families whose offspring often become high-ranking heroes or are capable of amassing a fortune comparable to that of a king, and with such resources it is not difficult to use some tricks to increase the level of blood purity or rank of a child. Our hero looked up and said that it turns out that it is extremely difficult for the children of crappy heroes to change their position, and Alex immediately agreed with his master. Deus thought a little and said that their hero had already stated that he had a bare rank, which means that he had already been evaluated, after which Deus asked his servant if he knew what the Demon King was thinking about now. The servant looked at her master and said that he couldn't even imagine. And then the master began to get angry and ask why she was so weak and why did they constantly pass over the pathetic people who squabble so much over their money. The servant did not find anything to answer and simply apologized to his master. The Demon King got angry but said that he doesn't care about the demon world and doesn't care about it one bit. So now he's more interested in where their hero went. The hero, meanwhile, was in the hero's noodle shop and preparing noodles. He suddenly saw that his master was coming along with his servant, and smiled and asked how well they slept. Deus looked at this guy and asked why he was selling noodles, to which the heroes replied that he had some free time. So he decided to try and said that although it looks so, it still brings in decent money. The Demon King immediately sat down and asked for a bowl of noodles and the hero said that he would do it right away. After that, he began to cook and after just a couple of minutes, he served the ready-made lapsa to his master. Deus looked at the plate in surprise because he saw noodles for the first time in his life. After that, he took a couple of bites and was very surprised to find that it was simply incredibly tasty. When Alex heard this, I remembered that he, too, had never tried such noodles in his life and began to braid them with gusto. The Demon King and his servant talked about how our hero has real talent. And they told him to give up on becoming a hero and just sell noodles, because it will make him rich. The guy smiled and thanked them for such a nice compliment. He got a couple of seconds and said something but he wanted to say thank you to his master. He stated that thanks to the fact that he accepted his braid, he was able to buy his younger ones a uniform for the hero's school and he always felt bad because they were the only ones who didn't have it, and they never complained. But he had to see them when he brought a new thing. Deus devoured the noodles and asked what kind of hero schools these were. The hero immediately smiled and said that it might seem to his master that he is taking on too much. But now, at his request, they are going to a private elementary school for heroes. And for him, it would be too late. But they can grow into a hero or a priestess. Me from here, their conversation called a man who said that a fly had settled in his bowl. The man started screaming and saying that he decided to eat at this garbage eatery. But there was a fly in his bowl. And his girlfriend started talking about what she had already mentioned that you shouldn't look here. The hero apologized and said that in fact there are no flies in this place at all. The man immediately poured noodles in his face and told him not to argue. After that, he began to shout at the hero and ask if he really said that he was a fairly respectable gentleman. He was lying. After that, he began to say that his father was a very powerful person and his burp could close with a snap of his fingers. The man looked at our hero a little and remembered him, said that he knew him and he was from the Eppentrop family, the same one that always produces crappy heroes. Everyone immediately started laughing and saying, "Are they not extinct yet?" And the man began to laugh and say that they know this family very well in this city and also stated that these are just poor people who, when you came to his father to beg for work, but his father laughed at them and kicked them out, and now his son is selling such vomit at some counter. And this was probably very unpleasant. A man laughed and said that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. After that, they started laughing at our hero even harder and said, does he really still consider himself a hero? Because he called the shop a hero's noodle shop? Mr. Deus turned and asked what kind of fly was constantly buzzing and buzzing over his ear. The man immediately got angry and asked did this poor man decide to call the honorable gentleman with that word and does he really want to die? After that, the Demon King extended your hand towards these people and they fell silent for a second. Then he clenched his fist, and these people braided right away as if they were clenched. This guy's girlfriend immediately started screaming heart-rendingly, and saying that her husband had just been killed. After that, she lifted her dress and began to pull it out with tears in her eyes and beg for help. The guy, too, cast a spell on her and said that those who do not show gratitude to the hero who saved them, they have the right to enjoy this world, and it would be better if they just die. Everyone looked at the Demon King in surprise, and meanwhile he simply turned around and continued his noodles, to the surprise of everyone around him and our hero. While he was eating, he blinked once and noticed that a note appeared in front of him which said that a dragon had been spotted near Leia's castle, and our hero needed to go there immediately. Also the note at the bottom was signed with a golden dragon. The Demon King immediately stood up and told our hero to get ready. After all, they finally had a cool task and they received their first request from a special client. So it's time for them to go and earn money and not waste their pants in this place. After that, they all got dressed, and immediately headed to the desired castle. Zeke, as usual, went to hell. Understand that the servant and the demon king did not change their clothes in the meantime. Suddenly, Alex looked at the hero and asked if he was really nervous because he noticed that the guy was just shaking, and the hero immediately smiled, saying that he was a little nervous because he had never thought about fighting even with orcs or goblins. And now they are hunting dragons, and before meeting them, this was beyond his dreams. After that, the guy scratched his head and said that every time he looks at Satan, he feels a certain surge of confidence and understands that this is just an ordinary dragon. And although he is sure that he will be scared to death at the sight of him, now he is completely energized. He said that this guy just has a great attitude, which is suitable for fighting dragons. Alex smiled again and said that no matter what this guy came up with, Mr. Demon King has already appointed him as a hero, and even though most of the time it's unnoticeable, but he's the leader in this adventure. So he needs to be more confident. The boy said that he understood all these words, gave a frightening smile, and stated that as a leader he doesn't even sound close, and he needs to try even harder. After another couple of hours, the servant said that they were finally approaching the desired castle, and they would see it around this bend, so they needed to hold on tight. As soon as they got as close as possible, they saw that the castle was surrounded by a giant ice dragon who was howling at the moon. Alex said that this dragon was 10 times larger than the previous ones, and immediately noticed that he had a huge parasite on his face that repaired his will. Alex and the hero looked at the castle and realized that most likely it had already fallen, and there were no people left there. But the Demon King, who had just woken up, asked everyone to calm down, and pointed his finger to the right, saying that they were all in that safe place over there. He also stated that in such a castle there must have been several G-class heroes and they were probably able to escape, and our hero immediately said that this was a huge relief for him. After that, the Demon King rubbed his eyes and said that the stage was ready, the audience had already gathered, so they would be leaving soon and the crappy hero needed to quickly prepare. The people who escaped from the castle looked at him and the huge dragon with thoughts that this was the real end of the world, and they needed to give blankets to the wounded in order to hold out longer. Otherwise they would all die here. Some prayed and begged to stop this terrible hurricane of icy dust and asked God, has he already left them? One of the men said that he is not sure how things are with God, but they are sure that the king clearly left them to die because he is not even visible. Meanwhile, the king was with his fighters under the dome of the magicians, and said that it was so hot here as if they were in a bathhouse. The dissatisfied king asked where the heroes were, who went to the saints for help. After all, they should have already returned his castle. One of his assistants said that the heroes most likely had already died in this battle with the dragon because he could not contact them in any way. After these words the king got angry and asked his subordinates to do at least something because he would soon die from such heat. Suddenly, our hero appeared, along with the Demon King and his servant, who asked everyone to disperse. They jumped on their cart, right over the king, who looked in surprise at this idiotic hero. After this, the king said with disappointment that he was just a pervert in shorts and with a mop and didn't look like a hero at all. When our heroes were passing by, they accidentally touched the magicians, and the shield was destroyed, and so the king immediately began to shout that he was cold, so they must quickly restore the spell. He continued to get angry and say that they did not dare to jump over the king's head and hope that he would destroy the dragons. And the residents were surprised to find that an unknown hero was rushing to fight the dragon in only his shorts. They looked at this guy and couldn't believe that he was really called a hero because he looked more like a clown or a pervert who came here to seduce children. Meanwhile, the hero said that he was very cold and ashamed, and Alex said that this guy was doing a good job for the second time. They drove past people from Azov who froze to death, and the hero said that he was very sorry that so many could not escape and froze to death. After another couple of minutes, they had already arrived, almost at the right place, and the Demon King was still looking carefree into the sky. After a couple more minutes, the Demon King finally said that his servant and the hero could begin to prepare and said that the plan this time would be exactly the same and the hero needed to stand where he would be clearly visible, and in the meantime his servant would catch this amphibian and throw it at our hero's feet. In short, the demons continued to say that everything was the same as last time and our hero would have to end this battle with a heroic flourish. After that, The Demon King told his subordinates not to even think about suffering from bullshit again this time and forcing the Demon King to work instead of his servant, to which Alex said that his master brain should not worry because this time everything will be completely different. Alex got up and opened a portal near the cart, and stated that his humble servant messed up a little and didn't notice the enemy's condition. But this time everything will be different, and such mistakes will never happen again. Finally, the Demon King told his servant not to kill this dragon and capture him alive. The demon smiled and said that he understood the task perfectly, and would simply beat this dragon half to death instead of killing it. After that, Alex looked at the hero and stated that given the size of the dragons, things might not go a little according to plan. Therefore, he just needs to stand where he should and be ready. The hero was surprised and asked what could go wrong and asked where he should be. But the guy had already jumped into his portal to deal with the dragon. Deus, meanwhile, asked his hero to stop the cart. After this, the Demon King decided that it would be better for him to take a little nap now, and advised the hero to go and deal with all these problems himself. The hero said that he would like to remind him of something, but immediately fell silent when he saw that no one was listening to him anymore. He was a little embarrassed and asked the Demon King to go with him because he was about to wet himself from fear. Inside, the hero was thinking that I knew that I would be afraid of death as soon as I saw this huge dragon up close. Meanwhile, Alex had already begun to fight the dragon and his parasite without braiding, and our hero stood and could not believe that he was left alone. But inside he thought that Mr. Alex was simply amazing in the fight. But he also thought that because of the icy dust he could see almost nothing, and did not understand where he needed to find a place so that Alex could quickly notice him. Unexpectedly, the Demon King threw a shield at our hero, and he asked did he plan to forget the shield that he carried here. And all this time he said that heroes should at least have a shield, because this was his father's instruction. The hero apologized for being so forgetful, and the Demon King smiled and cast a spell on this shield and said that it was a gift this time, it should help. The Demon King said that this is a protective barrier, and if anything it should definitely withstand the dragon's grub. The hero immediately cried with joy and thanked his master for such a generous gift. But the Demon King fell asleep immediately after that, and gave up on everything that was happening. The man, meanwhile, took his shield and weakly, saying that this time he definitely won't screw up and he needs to hurry up because he can't keep Sir Alex waiting for so long. He ran and looked for an easily visible place, somewhere high and in the center, so that the servant of the Demon King could quickly deal with the dragon and send it to our hero. Suddenly his gaze stopped on one of the rocks, and he decided that he needed to quickly climb there in order to pretend that he was defeating the dragon with one blow. Meanwhile, Alex continued to fight the parasite. At some point, his body began to change and become covered with ancient runes and his attacks became stronger and stronger. They continued the fight and after a couple of minutes, when the man was a little exhausted, he asked, "Is this dragon really so tenacious because of its size?" Alex was a little tired from the fact that this had all dragged on for so long and decided that it was time to end it, raised his hand and delivered a huge blow, right in the face of this dragon. Meanwhile, Zeke stood on the top of the cliff, and thought that even here he was scared, but Sir Alex alone was coping with the dragon. He looked up and thought that most likely this man was a dragon slayer hunter. The hero looked around and saw that a crowd of people was supporting him, and was happy that the hero had come to save them, and God had answered their prayers. The king was clearly nervous and was thinking, is this naked pervert really a hero? And the guy is embarrassed because everyone is trying to cheer him up, but he doesn't do anything yet. Although all the same, these words gave him courage, and he looked more boldly into the future. But inside he thought that the real hero here is far from him, who is shaking with fear. But Alex and Zeke became envious, because he also wanted to be like this man to save people and give them hope, to be a real hero. Suddenly he heard someone asking for help. He looked down and saw how the little boy was frozen to someone. He also saw that Alex clearly had problems with this dragon, because he had not been able to defeat it for a considerable time. Alex realized that the problem was his parasite, because it is restored until the host dies, and this is simply the incredible power of the parasite, because now he is more like a zombie dragon. After that, Alex thought about it and told this dragon that if it cannot be killed, then there is only one option left, and he will just need to cut off everything unnecessary from this dragon. He used the 100 hands technique and gathered them all into one big hand. After that, he began to mercilessly beat this dragon, and as soon as the dragon relaxed a little, he grabbed it by the neck with his huge hand and lifted it into the air. The dragon tried to resist, and the stones that flew away from them even reached our hero, who was trying to defend himself from them. They voted to fight, and the heroes noticed that the fragments from the stones would soon reach the people, so he decided that they needed to save these people as soon as possible. He ran up to the boy who was braiding, frozen, but still conscious. He told him not to worry because he would get them all out now. The hero began to look at this man who had been brought to death, and noticed that he was frozen while trying to save not a boy but a girl. His wife was still conscious and begged that you were a hero, saving at least the child. Zeke gathered his strength and tried to destroy this huge piece of ice. With his mop he told them to hold on a little longer, and he would help them all. Inside, he thought that he would have to act like a barbarian and cut through his father's body in order to get there and save them. He also thought that Sir Alex had almost defeated the dragon, and he needed to do it faster and faster to get back to position. Meanwhile, Sir Alex continued to fight, and noticed that the dragon's doom began to glow. Residents of the city said that they recognized this color, and asked the hero to hide somewhere, because this color was destroyed from the castle. But it was too late, and the dragon used his ultimate. Our hero raised his shield to protect himself from this threat, and prayed inside that he would not die today. But the shield shattered into fragments. She and the hero flew up, with the thought that today was his last day. Even the king, under his shield, felt cold from this dragon's ultimate. Alex smiled and said that it looked the same as last time, but there wasn't much left of the dragon because its wings had been torn off. Alex said that it is becoming difficult for him to maintain the state of this pose that he takes for war after 20 years because it is quite tiring. Meanwhile, the hero rejoiced that he did not die thanks to the magic of Sir Satan, but suddenly his pupils dilated and he remembered that he had to save a child who was almost frozen to death. He saw that the mother, with all her strength, tried to protect him with her body, and froze to death, while the child was still alive and crying loudly. The hero began to rise to his feet and push you away from the snow with the thought that he would soon come and save you from this guy. But when he looked down, he noticed that his left arm and left leg had become like ice and had fallen off. Then his second leg fell off, and he only had one arm left. The residents of this city who looked at him begged him to go back and save his you, but still, he continued to crawl to this child to save him with the thought that even if he is a bad hero, he still remains a hero. And he cannot save everyone like other heroes, but he can save at least this child. Sir Alex, meanwhile, looked at the dragon and asked if he still hasn't realized that cold attacks don't work on him. He thought a little and said that this is exactly the reason why people use dragons from time to time. After this, Alex decided to attack this dragon again in order to finally finish it off, and the hero, through great pain, was finally able to crawl to the child and grab him. And immediately after that the dragon once again used his attack, which froze everything around, and our hero was thrown back by a shock wave. When he came to his senses, he was already almost completely frozen, and in his arms was a child who did not stop crying. Suddenly, Deus appeared in front of our hero, who said that he really didn't understand this. Zeke looked at him, and Deus continued to say that he really doesn't understand how people hope to defeat him if they are so weak. After all, they are like a candle that he could easily blow out, and yet people sacrifice themselves for others. Deus was silent for a bit, and asked how they could lose to them for 665 centuries in a row. He was silent for a while and added that he didn't understand this point blank. Zeke became completely frozen, and on the verge of death he said that he was sorry for not being there on time, and said that he would do better next time. But as soon as he agreed, the forces left him, and his head let go. But in his hands he still had a child who continued to cry loudly. After some time, this hero began to come to his senses and be surprised that he was still alive. He suddenly jumped out of bed and shouted that he must stop the dragon, and asked Satan what was happening to the dragon. But as soon as he woke up, he noticed that he was alone, lying on a bed in the destroyed house of Satan. After that, he held his head and wondered why he was here, because the last thing he remembers is how he froze to death after the attack of this huge dragon. He then remembered that he had lost both legs and an arm and looked at his arm, seeing that it had grown back with some bluish stitches. He looked at his legs and tried to move them, but in his head he didn't understand what was happening because he was sure that he was in a terrible state. After that, the guy looked down and saw that his master was standing there from the master's servants, who were holding a huge mountain of weapons. Deus looked at our hero and asked how he slept. The boy said that he did not understand what happened to his body, but said that first he wanted to find out what happened to the child. Deus said that they took care of both the dragon and the child, and the hero need not worry. He also said that if the hero had enough rest, he could come down here and clean up a little because it was time for them to open the store. Zeke, meanwhile, thought that as soon as he saw this man's face, all his anxiety disappeared, and so they continued to fulfill the golden dragon's requests. But every time he managed to defeat the dragon, it somehow miraculously disappeared. After a couple of months, they noticeably replenished their arsenal of weapons, and the next morning a whole mountain of weapons appeared in front of their house. And so they continued over and over again, catching these dragons, and getting rich. Every time Deus came to have lunch and enjoy noodles, there was a note in his soup from the golden dragon, which said their next place. Over time, the hero's country began to go somewhere, and he was already furiously rushing to attack this dragon to pretend that he would finish him off with one blow. After dozens of defeated dragons, people began to recognize our hero and say that he was a dragon hunter sent by the gods themselves. And the Demon King was happy that his plan was going very well, and thus the Zika squad became the most famous team in these places. After another month, they finally finished building the Devil's Weapon shop, and the shop was finally open. As soon as they went inside, the hero said that she looked simply incredible, and there was goods here, worth many millions. Meanwhile, Alex said that he didn't expect that everything would look like this inside, and most likely the hero put in quite a lot of effort, and Alex said that their store should not be equal even in large cities. In short, the demon smiled and said that all this did not matter and now they would be in charge of these stores. The guys looked at Satan in surprise and asked what is he talking about. After that, the Demon King smiled and asked them if they had ever seen the store owners themselves work in them, and Alex asked his master if he understood how troublesome and time-consuming it would be. Deus unexpectedly took these heroes by the shoulders and said that he just wants to be rich and not own stores. Well, if this does not suit them, then they can always discuss their wishes regarding the management of these stores. Everyone immediately agreed and began to hold their necks, because after the Demon King's grip it was quite painful, and the Demon King himself said that they had already resolved this issue, so they should work hard to make the store truly great. Zeke walked up to the Demon King and asked if he could sell noodles after finishing his shift here because he still needs to earn money for school for his younger brothers and sisters. And the man said that he doesn't care, and he can do whatever he wants. Can you this? The Demon King asked his servant to bring what they discussed before. Alex agreed and they immediately brought a huge shield, from which draconic energy wafted. And in short, the demons asked someone to read what was written on this shield. Alex began to read the description of this shield and say that this is Lagoon of Doom, and it is created from scales received as a reward during the hunt for dragons and combined with blue and black stones as well as chaos scales. He also stated that this is an SS ranked shield that would be a blacksmith of the underworld, who was nicknamed the best, and is called Hermes. Alex stated that such a shield can withstand even about 3 and also the king of demons himself. Zeke said that this is simply incredible, and the skill of the dwarves amazes him. By the underworld, Alex meant the demons died, but our hero took it literally and decided that these were gnomes from the caves. After that, Deus threw this shield to his hero, and as soon as Zeke took it in his hands, he found himself in some dark space, and did not understand where he was now. Unexpectedly, the shield turned to this hero and asked, "Did this man call him?" Our hero looked at the source of the voice and saw that in front of him were huge eyes, red. It was a shield that said that his name was Doom Lagoon, and from now on, Zeke will be his master, until the flame of life itself goes out in the shield. After that, the hero immediately found himself back in the shop, and holding his shield as he noticed that the Demon King tried to attack him. He immediately became scared and he raised his shield to defend himself. He was immediately thrown a short distance, and he accidentally broke his leg. Alex started shouting that he didn't understand what kind of owner would destroy his own store on the first day after opening, and Deus said that this was just a small test. The hero with a couple of broken ribs raised his hand up and thanked Satan, saying that this shield is simply magnificent. It is so good that even the heroes of grand rank would want to get their hands on it. Deus was surprised, because even though it was only 1/100th of his full size, this guy was still able to block his doomed spear with such ease. Deus said that now this shield will belong to the hero, and the hero opened his mouth, not believing in his happiness. Demiurge smiled and said that if the hero is so weak, then they will have to supply him with cool clothes and they will start from there, and then they will pick up a couple of things according to the situation. The hero cried and asked, is Deus really sure that he wants to give him such a cool shield, even considering that the guy is just the weakest hero? The boy began to cry even more and say that he would never have thought in his life that he would hold in his hands something as magnificent as this shield. Meanwhile, the barbarians in the kingdom of Verde, which Satan had destroyed, were having parties and getting drunk, and their leader wondered why this king needed so much gold, because you can't take it to the next world, and it was a completely shameless old man. The man hugged the princess and said, what does she think about this? The girl with a blank look was still silent, and the man continued to laugh and said that the girl was quite funny. A guy in a dark cape suddenly came to them, and everyone immediately stopped the fun and began to look at him. The guy walked back and forth and looked for something, but couldn't find it, and everyone looked in surprise at what he was doing here. Suddenly he stopped and thought that despite everything from the fortress gates to here there is not a single trace of the battle, so he does not understand what happened here. The gang leaders looked at this guy and asked who he was. The man with the strange hair color apologized and said that they could ignore him and just do what they were doing before. After that, the man immediately jumped up to the throne to inspect it. He finally found what he was looking for and realized that the entire castle had been destroyed in just one explosion. He looked at the rocks that were destroyed by the same explosion and was surprised at how strong the attack was. He immediately wondered if one person could do this. Meanwhile, the gang leader got angry and asked his friends to throw this guy out of here. The man immediately looked at them and told them not to move because it was dangerous. He also said that even though they were just pathetic cockroaches who had taken over this place, their lives were still worth something. He was immediately attacked by robbers who said that the guy was simply delusional, and they needed to kill him as soon as possible. The guy immediately began to explain to them that they were more and more of their creation and suggested that they resolve everything peacefully. But he noticed that people did not want to calm down and immediately waved his hand, and everyone's legs were cut off on their own. He looked at the other people and said that if they didn't want to end up like their friends, then they needed to stay still while he inspected everything here. The old man looked at this guy and asked who he was, and the man suddenly raised his finger up. He said with a smile that some people from above were interested in the events that happened here, so he had a feeling that something very bad happened here and he was sent here to investigate this matter, so he hopes for their cooperation. The guy also stated that these people are representatives of the Lord and they are called saints. The old man immediately got scared and asked if this man really sent the saints here, and the guy leaned over him and said that he saw that the old man understood everything, so no more explanations were needed. He also asked why in that case he couldn't immediately tell everything about what happened that day and who or what did it. The old man tried to say something, and the man, meanwhile, said that he simply couldn't wrap his head around what happened here, because this can be considered the best disappearance without a single trace after the destruction of the fortress in the blink of an eye. The leader of the bandits said, although he knows me a lot, because they came here after everything happened here, but he heard that the merchants in the city called him white-haired. He continued to talk about what they said, that some unknown white-haired man came into the fortress in the morning and a little later they heard screams and the fortress suddenly exploded. The old man looked at this man and said that he didn't know anything more than what he had already told, because everyone in the fortress died, so only God here knows what happened here. The man smiled and thanked this man for his cooperation, saying that it was time for him to go. The leader of the gang was silent for a while, but said that this man was their savior, and then said that the man would never understand this because the tyranny of King Verde was simply unbearable, and the greatest castle in the world. It's just a laugh because he was built on the bones and blood of the people who lived here. The man continued to shout that God had sent them a white-haired savior to overthrow the evil king and return the fortress to the ordinary people. Everyone who heard this immediately began to support the old man, and said that he was right. And the old man did not stop shouting that this guy is the real Messiah and is much more inclined towards people than the saints who hide behind God but live in luxury. The man looked at this old man and said that he said a pretty good thing, but it would be the saints who would determine the origin of this white-haired guy, whether it was divine or evil. After that, The man turned around and snapped his fingers, instantly cutting off the man behind him, the head, and said that he did not dare to talk about the saints of this kind of thing, and for such a crime, it was not enough even to kill. Deus and his servant, meanwhile, defeated another dragon and said that it also contained the devil's bacteria, and the servant corrected his master and said that these were not bacteria but parasites, to which Deus replied that for him they were all the same and they had to go anyway. Already survive the mother of dragons because he is sure that she will take care of everything else. They started to leave, and Deus said that at first he was happy because they had a lot of work, but now he thinks that this could become a serious problem for the dragons. After all, if you think about it, the goddess of dragons should have been doing this herself. The master's servant said that it is possible. The whole point is that the girl is now in her human body, which she uses to stay in this world, the demon king asked in surprise. Does it really matter? The servant said that he was not sure, but he immediately said that it seemed that information about this was in the interdimensional library, and he had read about it. Deus asked what kind of library this was, and Deus immediately heard from his servant that the library is one of the most important aspects of the divine court. After all, it stores evidence for everything, and while memories and facts can be easily distorted with the help of hallucinations caused by magic, then the history stored in the library is the only and indisputable proof of anything, because the facts reflected in it cannot be searched for. In short, the demons came out with all this and said that it turns out that the golden dragon does not want to take a direct part in all these events for fear of leaving a mark on himself in the interdimensional library, and it turns out that her stay here is a secret that she does not want to divulge. The servant came out with all this, and said that his master was right. Alex also stated that it would take a long time for a humble person like him to understand the thoughts and reasons of a dragon deity. As soon as our heroes approached Zeke, they saw him slowly sleeping, covered in the blood of dragons. Alex smiled and said that perhaps this guy was already exhausted. So, the servant said that maybe it wasn't obvious from the guy, but he still put his hand in and resisted the dragon, which would be difficult for even a G-rank hero to cope with. And the servant also said that perhaps only this guy is capable of this because he is used to hold on and overcome difficulties. And then, while trying, Deus looked at the guy and the shield next to him and asked why he was moving his shield that way. The servant smiled and said that this guy said that he should take care of this shield, because it is very important for him, and talked about how he would give it to his younger brother when he becomes a hero. Deus smiled and asked his servant to tell this I'm fooling him to use this shield and not bother at all about its safety, because for the younger one they can make another one like that. Then the Demon King said that it was time for him to move out, and asked his servant to throw this guy into the cart, but only carefully so as not to wake him up, and the servant fulfilled this request deliciously. When they were already driving, Deus asked his servant how his limbs were doing and whether they were falling off. Alex began to talk about how he thought that the doctors of the underworld would cope so, but they did it pretty well, and Deus said that if someone wants to sew on a limb, then first you need to know how it is cut off, and he is more than sure that they had enough practice on human bodies. Deus thought a little and asked her servant if he thought that this guy would make an excellent hero if he were a D-class man. After all, he has a highly developed sense of responsibility, so he would definitely have handled it well. The servant began to laugh and talk about how the Demon King could jinx his success with such talk. Alex continued to laugh and say that in 20 years he and Zeke would be enemies. Deus smiled and said that this would definitely not happen. The servant began to scream and say that his master was destined to be the king of demons, to which the man smiled and said that this was all nonsense because he only wants to be a noble companion of the hero and not some there as a demon king. Deus also smiled and asked his servant how, in his opinion, their guy could cope with the role of the last hero. Alex immediately stated that this was impossible because he was not from the Zero generation. Deus asked what his servant was talking about, and the man began to tell him that the last hero was born in the 5th generation. And according to the rules of this world, people usually give birth to children at 20 years old, and their children, in turn, after 20 years give birth to their own, and they give birth to theirs, and so on. And thus when the 5th generation's 20th anniversary arrives, exactly 100 years have passed, and this is the same year when the invasion of the Demon King occurs. And Alex continued to say that the generation that will come out against them this year will be the beginning of a new cycle, and the so-called Zero generations. and in the 0 generation only one last hero is born, and thus Zeke, as a native of the 4th generation, cannot become the last hero, and only his descendants will be able to become them after some time. Deus smiled and said that according to him, every story when the Demon King invades the last hero is born, and this is the rule of the world. But it sounds like a stupid joke, and it is just a game. Alex looked at his master and asked him why he still refused the throne of the Demon King. The Demon King smiled and said that he seemed to be talking about it, and his servant got angry and said that he had never heard of it. After that, Deus thought and asked why he didn't have time to tell this, and the servant got a little nervous and said that he couldn't know for sure, to which Deus replied that there was nothing special, and the reason was that she had been on the throne for 3 years in. Suddenly Deus fell silent because he looked up and saw a huge, incomprehensible thing engulfed in flames. The Demon King said that it looked like an airship, and his servant added that it was him, and there must be someone important there. And right above this airship there was a dragon that attacked it. And Deus was surprised that there are so many dragons in this world, and they are found at almost every step. But as soon as they looked at the coat of arms of this airship, they did not realize that there were purebreds on it. Alex immediately began to tell his master that the family with this coat of arms produced more than 100 of the latest heroes and the purest blood even among other similar families. So he does not understand why the two sides who fought Bob's side for centuries of law are now fighting against each other. After all, what is happening in modern times cannot be comprehended at all. The Demon King laughed and said that they could come closer and watch this show. Meanwhile, the knights were finally able to successfully land their balloon, and they didn't understand why this thing was so heavy, and why they had to carry it. The head of this event told them that they were klutzes. They needed to be careful with the load. He looked at them and didn't understand what was in the guys' heads, and why they couldn't imagine how expensive this thing was. Because if there was even the slightest scratch on it, then heads would roll one after another. After that, he turned down the translation and saw that a dragon was flying towards them at great speed. The man immediately began to shout that this dragon was aiming at their important cargo, and asked to stop it at any cost, and for the magicians and archers to be in full combat readiness. The magicians were able to put up a barrier, and miraculously the cargo survived. As soon as the dragon flew over, the man immediately climbed the mountain and asked how things were going with his cargo. The knights said that there were no problems, but there were victims, and the man didn't even worry about them, and he said that the main thing is the load. The man saw that the dragon was starting to return and shouted that it was just a young dragon, so they should finally shoot it. Suddenly, a hero appeared, raised his blade and with one blow, cut this dragon into several pieces. It was Sir Varys who became covered in blood and said that it was the dragon who begged for death because he escaped death and allowed him to escape after the first fight. The man who stood behind immediately began to suck up to this knight and say that he is simply incredible, because cutting a dragon in half is simply an incredible achievement. And in the meantime the man threw away his sword and said that the dragon is an ordinary dragon and it doesn't matter young or not. He then asked them to clean his sword. After that, he also told them to restore order here and send someone for help. The man smiled and said that they would do it instantly. Sir Varys looked at this fat man and said that if someone finds out about their Georgia, then his father will instantly bare his head, so they must act as carefully as possible. The man immediately began to smile and say that the knight should rest quickly. Well, immediately Deus and his servant appeared and asked what was so important about this cargo. Deus immediately cut the canvas and saw that there was another dragon. So this is the one who is trying to whine at us. The Demon King immediately stated that this dragon's eyes looked quite normal and that it was an ordinary dragon not infected with any parasites. Immediately Deus said that now he understands why the smaller dragon was chasing them, because now it is obvious that he just wanted to save his mother. And so he asked why they chained this dragon, because they have a truce with these creatures and they are a family of heroes, and here it smells like some kind of conspiracy. The knight looked at these people and said that it looked like his knights would have to take care of a couple more corpses today. The servant whispered a question into his master's ear and asked why he was provoking this man, to which Deus replied, "Isn't he curious about what abilities purebloods have?" Varys turned around and started to walk away and told the others to take care of these guys. The fat man immediately said that he didn't even know who they were. They were standing in front of him now, but they saw something they didn't need to see, so they needed to be killed urgently. Deus saw the Sir leaving and said that it was quite boring and then ordered his services to kill all the knights. Alex looked at our hero and said that they should actually play the role of the hero's companions, and the Demon King immediately asked his assistant what he proposed to do about all these problems. Alex said that fighting against the pureblood family was against their plan, and then the Demon King said that now that he was talking about it, you would think that this guy is also a saint like Zeke, and it would be a mistake to attack them. Meanwhile, the servant said that the heroes' families always use the prefix saint in their name to show that they are blessed. They continued to discuss all sorts of little things, and the servant began to talk about how people take the name of the trees that grow in their territories. And Deus was surprised and asked, do they really have a common day for an exhibition of trees? And the fat man below began to shout at these people and say so that they would stop mocking the heroes. And then he looked at his knights and told them to immediately capture and kill these people. The magicians immediately attacked our hero and his servant, but at great speed they ended up behind them and continued talking. But suddenly Deus said that this was not very convenient, and asked his servant to sort it out quickly so as not to wake up their hero. The fat man looked at all this and asked in surprise how they could get there so quickly. The servant, meanwhile, looked at Satan Wu and said that it would be very easy to kill all these people, but asked, is this really necessary? And the Demon King got angry and asked why he constantly asks what instead of following orders. The servant again reminded behind the cool crown of demons that they were just companions of the hero, and the Demon King irritably replied that his servant should hurry up, run, and fall to his knees and beg for mercy so that they could leave calmly. The servant thought a little and pointed at the dragon, and said that it was too late for this because they had seen their big secret. The Demon King immediately began to get angry and asked Alex what they wanted from him. The fat man had already begun to get angry and told his subjects to kill all these people, because they had been mocking them for 5 whole minutes. Alex, meanwhile, was thinking that he didn't want to get involved with the family of heroes, but most likely he would have to enter into battle and there was nothing he could do about it. After that, the fat man saw how his entire army died immediately, and could not believe his eyes, and behind him appeared a knight of this family, who demanded that they give him a sword. After that, he immediately jumped and swung his huge blade to attack the Demon King's servant. But as soon as he swung, he stopped because he noticed that the Demon King and his minion had immediately appeared in another place, and it would be difficult for him to reach them. The hero looked at Satan and his assistant, and asked who they were because they were too easily able to dodge his sword, and also killed all his soldiers. Are they really members of other families? The Demon King laughed, and said that this guy didn't guess right at all and asked, does he really think that everyone who has any kind of power should be members of some kind of family? The knight looked at them nervously and asked if they were dragons in human form. But then he stopped and said that it didn't matter to him at all because now he just got rid of them. The Demon King smiled and said that it was impossible to get rid of him. At the very moment when this hero saw the smile of the Demon King, something deep inside this hero was awakened. He let out a deafening cry of hatred. He continued to scream and the aura around him changed. His scream began to destroy stones, and his body began to glow with divine light. He looked at the Demon King with incredible anger, ready to incinerate him with his eyes. Deus smiled and asked what kind of show this guy put on. But immediately after these words, the hero instantly found himself right in front of the servant's face. The Demon King thought for a bit, and said that this guy has changed a little in that second. But Deus was easily able to dodge even such a quick blow. Then he stood on one leg and said that this fool still doesn't understand that he still doesn't have enough speed and needs to move a little faster, otherwise the witnesses might inadvertently fall asleep. Suddenly Alex looked at our hero, and said that it was probably time for him to leave. The Demon King smiled and said that things were just starting to get interesting, and this guy was already trying to ruin all the fun again. The servant showed that his hand was cut off and he could not restore it, saying that he was a little scared and did not understand what happened. The Demon King looked at his subordinate's hand and said that it looked disgusting, and there was a vile light from it. Varus, meanwhile, swung again and was preparing to kill both of them with one blow. He immediately jumped up to the Demon King and said that he was about to die. Deus, meanwhile, said that his eyes cannot be deceived, and said that his henchman could easily kill this asshole but still hesitates. The hero, with his blade, struck directly at the Demon King's head to kill him, but instead of cutting off his head, his blade was destroyed, And the Demon King said with a smile that he had already told this guy that he could not be killed. Deus smiled and said that it would not be possible to cut off even a strand of his hair. The hero decided to use a surprise attack by summoning a weapon in his second hand, and Deus asked in surprise if he really was of noble blood, since they used such vile tricks. But it still didn't make sense because the Demon King easily dodged every blow from this guy, and asked him to show the power of pure blood. After a couple of seconds, the Demon King realized that he would not see anything new anymore and said that this hero was very boring, and he also stated that he had great expectations, because he was the heir of the blood of the last hero. But in reality it turned out that he was only faster than the ear and he's even too lazy to kill this man. And those whom he defeated in his life were probably just non-entities, and nothing else. After this, the Demon King used his spell to finish off this hero with one blow. But unexpectedly, his servant stood between them, who took the blow from both sides. The Demon King looked at Alex in surprise and asked, "Why is he doing this?" The man did not answer and turned around and pinned the hero face to the ground with one blow. Deus asked why Alex knocked him out instead of killing him. Also, the Demon King stated that before this the servant said that he was scared and did not want to engage in battle with this hero. But now, he pounced straight on his sword to protect his master. The Demon King looked him straight in the eyes and said that the guy must immediately explain and tell him everything in order. Alex apologized to his master and said that he was not concerned about this young hero, but about the order in this world. Deus was surprised and asked about some kind of order he was talking about, and his specialty was to do exactly the opposite. Alex answered briefly that this should all be within the established order, and if the news that you are freely walking on the surface spreads publicly, then the whole world will turn upside down, after which heroes will begin to arrive in an endless stream, just like cockroaches, and even a child who has just escaped from bed he will crawl to their threshold with a blade at his advantage, because this is the nature of people. The Demon King said that he doesn't care, anyone can come to him and lose in a fair duel, because he's been thinking about this for a long time and still can't get rid of one thought. The Demon King looked at the hero who was lying at his feet and asked his servant how such non-entities could defeat someone like the Demon King because it doesn't make any sense at all. Suddenly, the Demon King stopped and, looking at the way Alex smiled, he realized that in fact there was another hidden element that he had not been told about. Alex silently looked at our hero. The Demon King also looked at him and after a couple of seconds of silence asked if he would find out about this only after 20 years. To which his servant immediately replied that it would be so. In addition to the demons, he looked at his servant again and asked, "Is he really not going to tell this, arguing that this will disrupt the world order?" Alex smiled and said that his master was completely right, so he would not tell anything and suggested that he quickly return home. The Demon King began to take on a demonic form and say that he could kill everyone present here. His eyes immediately became bloodshot, and he asked what would happen in this case. The King of Demons said that the order that Alex was shaking so hard to maintain would be violated and he was actually provoking him to do it. In short, the demons were silent for a bit and asked will God really come down from heaven if he breaks such rules. Alex said that he himself really doesn't know what could happen, but he is sure of one thing. The Demon King's servant said with full confidence that if the Demon King did as he just said, then his dream of becoming the hero's companion would be destroyed. After all the heroes of the world would unite against the Demon King, and he would have no choice but to destroy this world to its very foundations, and perhaps he will become the greatest Demon King in history. The servant smiled and said that it was actually a great idea to attack people before the last hero appeared. After that, Alex approached Varys and said that he would now finish off this night. In the meantime, his master can rest a little. The Demon King immediately took his servant by the shoulders and said that most likely he belongs to the type of person who doesn't understand jokes because he didn't plan to start a war and doesn't want to get his hands dirty. And Alex asked, are they really just going to leave this guy here after such a long distance path and everything they had to experience? Alex agreed and opened the portal so that his master could go and rest. In short, the demons looked at his henchman and asked why he wasn't going to go. To which the man stated that first he wanted to make tracks and asked the guy to go and rest, and he would catch up later. In short, the demons, meanwhile, looked at the guy. How is his hand? To which he was told that such minor wounds would be instantly healed as soon as he returned to the underworld, so the hero did not need to worry and move forward. The Demon King smiled and said that he was not going to stay, and Alex wished him a good trip and immediately hunched over a little. As soon as the Demon King disappeared, Alex immediately appeared next to the knight with crazy eyes and took him by the head. He began to tell him in his ear that this little freak did not dare to defame him, one of the 7 dukes of the demon world, with this vile light. His eyes were as crazy as possible, and the man said that he personally, with his own hands, in 20 years, would end all his descendants and interrupt their line. Meanwhile, the Demon King found himself in front of the cart and looked at the hero who was sleeping like a log. The Demon King smiled and said that this guy must be very tired. The Demon King thought about what was going to happen in 20 years, and thought that all these rules and world order irritated him very much and that day would never come. But he immediately thought about dragons, and asked himself, is it really possible that the stupid mother of dragons doesn't even understand what's happening to her children? A girl immediately appeared above him and asked our hero what stupid mother of dragons he was talking about. The Demon King looked her straight in the eyes and said that he was talking about this girl. He looked at her and asked was she really watching with all these actions from the very beginning? Mother Dragon Goddess smiled and said that she actually placed her feather on him. The Demon King immediately said that if she wanted to make a formal complaint, he could be a witness. The Dragon Goddess smiled and said that this sounds very stupid and the Demon King cannot act as a witness. The Demon King said that the prejudice that all demons are bad is somewhat exaggerated, and the Mother Goddess replied that even taking into account this fact, the Demon King invaded this world every 100 years and destroyed something like this. Therefore, it would be quite strange if he were a witness in such a case. The Demon King thought for a bit, and said that she was right and then asked you men why are they doing this, can't demons just live in the underworld? The Mother of Dragons began to laugh and say that she didn't understand how this guy even became a Demon King and was asking such stupid questions. The Demon King, meanwhile, smiled and said that it was strange to hear this from the lips of the Mother of Dragons who just stood and watched her children being killed. He began to laugh and say that they even called them cargo, and he was also sure that this was not their first victim. Then he asked the girl why, in her opinion, they were conducting this hunt and explained that, of course, in order to make weapons out of them. After all, their body parts are priceless, and people even kill young animals trying to save their parents. The Demon King laughed, and said that this looked like an outright violation of the treaty. Mother Goddess looked at him, and asked if he could do something instead of her. The King of the Monsters smiled and said that he did not understand what she was talking about, and the Mother of Dragons smiled and said that he must take revenge on this vile who kills her children too. The Demon King said that he did not understand why he should do this and offered to do it herself, to which the girl replied that she could not do this. After all, when the dragon leaves his lands in order to enter the human world, they will have every right to kill him, and the situation is exactly the same as with the wars between people and demons once every 100 years, because these are the laws of this world. Therefore, while her children are dying in the vastness of this world, she cannot do anything. The Demon King got angry and said that he was already tired of hearing about these rules, and asked who came up with them in the first place. Suddenly, strong pressure appeared, and Deus saw his own blood for the first time in his life. The Mother of Dragons said that these are the rules of the world in which they live. The guy started trying to get up and talk about how she first told him about some strange rules and laws, and now she's talking about some performers who prevent them from doing what he wants. The Demon King stood up despite the enormous pain and said that he had had enough of this crap, and if they were so almighty then let them come down here and start ruling this world themselves. They would come up with some laws and rules that others should follow. The Mother of Dragons saw that he was able to stand up despite all this, and said that it was amazing that he could withstand this in a human body, and stated that he may look dumb but a Demon King is still a Demon King in the end. After this, the Mother of Dragons looked at the hero and Satan and asked what was the real reason why he left his post. The Mother of Dragons said with a smile that she was very interested in this man, and in the last 666 centuries he was the first who decided to resign from the post of King of Demons. So she was sure that by this act he caused a lot of problems for the performers and, after all, had already broken the rules. The Demon King noticed that the girl was talking about this with a very pleased face and asked if she really had a spirit of rebellion hidden inside her. The girl immediately said that he was talking complete nonsense, and she was just curious because he was the first one to do something like this, and by the way he should be wary of the performers. Because now he may be safe, but in 20 years, when that very day comes I'm sure they will do something to force the Demon King to follow the script. The Demon King said that he was not at all afraid of their antics, and asked why he should be afraid of the state he experienced a couple of minutes ago, because they had to deal with him personally, and he was ready for this meeting. The Mother of Dragons still asked why he left his post as the Demon King. She said with a smile that with this act he broke the cycle that had been repeated for 665 centuries. The Demon King said that he didn't have anything special to ask for, and he just didn't want to do what he was told. After these words, a servant of the Demon King appeared from the portal and said that it was time for them to move out, and he had already cleared their tracks. Alex apologized for interfering with the conversation between the Demon King and the Mother of Dragons. Meanwhile, the Mother of Dragons said that he appeared at the most inconvenient moment. After that, they began to pack up to leave, and the Mother of Dragons said that the Demon King still had not answered her. But the Demon King had already laid down and was ready to fall asleep, saying that they would be bombarded with bad comments if they stood there for so long and just chatted, so he would tell next time. The next morning, our heroes approached the property of the Svyatoshtvarsha family in full force. Deus asked in surprise why they were so rich, and his servant replied that this house belonged to the family of the hero who lived more than 60,000 years ago. The servant raised his finger up and reminded that when the hero's family becomes famous, it has many patrons such as nobles and lords, because being a sponsor of the hero is the same as fighting for world peace. And such things as yesterday's dragon hunt are quite profitable enterprises, and frankly speaking, this is something that everyone knows about but turns a blind eye and even among dragons does not pay attention to it, because people are waging a war with demons and the dragon has no choice but to help the first in this war after all. If the world of people falls, then the dragons will be next. Deus thought for a bit, and said that dragons' body parts are very valuable even in the demon world. Zeke felt ashamed that his family, compared to this one, was quite poor, and he pretended to lose consciousness. And meanwhile Deus said that they were here for the same thing and it would be something like an undercover operation, and they would find out the reasons for poaching dragons. The servant immediately stopped his master, and reminded him that yesterday they almost killed one of the heroes and their appearance will now definitely be recognizable. Therefore, they need to disguise themselves at least a little. They decided to just swap things. Alex, meanwhile, thought that maybe they should just leave. Deus thought for a moment, and shouted at the top of his lungs that the candidate for the role of the last hero, named Zeke van Svyatobuk, was here. After that, they finally got inside, and sat in line. Zeke looked at the picture on the wall which depicted the last hero of the 52nd generation who fought the Demon King for 13 days and won. Suddenly, the owner of the house appeared, saying that his name was Sol van Svyatoshtvarsha. He is the current representative of the third generation of heroes of this century, and he has retired and is now at the head of the house. Zeke immediately smiled and said that he was very glad to welcome such a great hero and, pointing to Deus and Alex, said that these were his companions, and the man immediately stated that he already knew everything about him and his group. The man was silent for a while and looked at Deus, deciding that the rich trader had bought himself a place next to the hero from a fallen family. The story was unpleasant, but not new, the man thought. Then asked Deus what brought them to this house, to which our hero replied that nothing of the kind had happened and they had just heard some rumors and they wanted to see for themselves. The man began to get angry and say that the voice and tone of the person he sees does not correspond to his position. The guy immediately said that he thought that they would communicate on equal terms as heroes. The man calmed down a little and said that he understands why these people are so straightforward, because he used to be like that too. However, he said that now they should be more careful because there is always a bigger fish. After that, the man sat down and asked what rumors they were talking about, to which Deus replied that according to rumors they have good materials here and they are just looking for something. The man smiled and said that he understands that these people have money, but he doubts that they will have enough for the things they need, because their family works only with the best materials. Deus smiled and said that he did not need such a trifle. Then he was silent for a while and said that rumors say that this family has something better than parts of giants. The man tensed a little and said that only dragons are higher than giants. Deus threw a bag on the table and said that his hero was still a newbie. Therefore, he needed items to maintain his image. The man opened the bag and saw that there were demonic bloodstones. He immediately asked himself in surprise where this guy was able to get so many rare things. Then looked at our hero and said that there was a truce between dragons and people, and trading parts of dragons is illegal, and not a family does business against the law. He also said that they have other things of comparable rarity, and they can use them for armor. Deus immediately looked at his servant, and said that they need to go because this family has nothing. After this, the guy said that he had recently seen someone transporting a dragon on an airship, and he was sure that he had seen the coat of arms of this family on this ship. The man's gaze immediately changed and he asked again, "Did they really see this?" Deus replied that they just needed high-quality things, but the man said that they needed to be more careful. Deus smiled and said that he could talk about this family's monopoly if he was in a bad mood, so he asked if they might have something that could shut his mouth. The man looked angrily at Deus, and immediately stood up, saying that he also wanted to ask something in response. He began to talk about a masked hero who suddenly appears and defeats dragons. After that, the man looked at the shield and said that perhaps it was just a coincidence, but the materials from the blue and dark dragons that the masked hero defeated were also present in this equipment. The man also said that he was fully aware of any artifacts in this world. He looked at Deus again, and stated that he would speak with him because he was much more like a leader than a hero of this group. The man told Deus that he did not know what connected him with the masked hero, but asked him to tell him when they met that his dragon hunt was reducing the income of some important people, and therefore several high-level people were going to get rid of the masked heroes and everyone associated with him. The man also said with a smile that such a treasure as the Fatal Lagoon should not be in the hands of the F-rank family because the number of legendary items must be controlled, and it does not matter whether it is people or equipment because rarity equals price. After that, the man stood up and said that their family would never work with smugglers, and they do not have any materials from dragons. And if they need several rank materials mentioned earlier, then they can come at any time. But now he is a little busy, so he needs to leave. After our heroes left this house, Deus said that this hero is an asshole. After that, his servant said that the most important thing for the hero is his equipment, and having taken control of the source of materials, they stand strong while most families experience ups and downs or remain on top for several more generations. Zeke looked down and said that he couldn't believe that all the heroes he believed in were like that. Deus smiled and said that now they are in their sights, because the top of the clan is hunting the masked hero. Deus smiled and said that in this case he would have to lie low, but first he needed to do something else. That same night they sneaked into this hero's estate to find the body of a dragon with which they could prove the poaching of this family. Zeke stopped and said that if they were trying to get inside, how could they walk right through the center of the castle? After these words, the guards immediately began to approach them. Zeke got scared and said that they had already been seen, but the guards just walked by as if they hadn't noticed our heroes. Deus said with a smile that he had cast an invisibility spell. Alex went ahead to scout out the situation, and Deus asked Zeke if his family could ever afford such a life. After these words, Deus stopped and said that they did not come here to act as heroes, but snuck into this estate to steal, and asked, "Is this hero not embarrassed by anything?" Zeke looked at his master and said that he knows that this is a crime, but after meeting with Sir Souls, he realized that only Deus can be called a real hero because in fact, they are not thieves now, but simply stop these criminals from monopolizing goods. But the guy also said that he had already given up trying to become a hero, because it was impossible, because of course he was able to get an incredible shield. But this is all thanks to Mr. Deus, and Zeke still hasn't done anything for this. But he still said with a smile that it doesn't matter as long as his younger ones can live well, because at least he wants them not to be called nonentities. Zeke said that he would raise excellent priestess and hero and make sure that they at least helped on the home front 20 years later in the 666 war, and he could see their portraits, so that their story would be passed down through the generations. Deus asked in surprise, "Is this all?" And the hero said that all he needs is to end the impoverished existence of his family in his generation, and for this he is ready to make a deal even with the devil. After this, Sir Alex appeared and said that he had already found everything, and they could move to the hiding place of these bastards. After this, he also stated that he found their book, and there are 76 families recorded here, each with its own history and authority. And they are all involved in poaching. And the place where the dragons are hidden is right under this lake. After that, the servants used a spell and made air around their heads so they could breathe underwater, and our heroes jumped. As soon as they were at the bottom, they saw a whole bunch of dragons. Alex said that according to the records, they collect the scales and then the healers heal the dragons, and thanks to magic the process is repeated over and over again, and it turns out that this is a living dragon scale farm. He also said that the oldest one has been in use for 230 years. Alex said that they need to hurry to take the scales and leave quickly. He tore off a piece and said that it was time for him to go upstairs. But the gentleman still remained in place and looked straight into the dragon's eye, with the thought that something didn't add up. After that, he destroyed all the chains in a couple of seconds. The dragons immediately broke out and flew up. The guards looked at it all and couldn't believe their eyes. The dragons immediately began to burn this estate. The ice ones, meanwhile, instantly froze all the guards. As soon as our heroes were on the surface, Alex immediately asked his master why he released them all. Deus briefly replied that he was furious because the face of that hero popped up in his head. Zeke, meanwhile, looked at all this destruction and thought about what he remembered. The gentleman promised to do everything secretly. Varys, meanwhile, was also in this estate, and heard these voices, instantly becoming angry. The head of this family took his weapon, and with incredible anger, flew out of the house, noticing our heroes. In rage, he asked who dared to do this to his family, and then I saw that it was a masked hero. Deus noticed his look and advised him not to approach them because this time he was definitely going to kill them. The father and son immediately jumped and swung their blades to instantly kill the two. But the oldest dragon, whom they had kept captive for the longest time, attacked them and immediately swallowed them. Deus immediately looked at his servant, and said that he didn't even lay a finger on these guys, to which the man noticed that this was true. After that, Alex thought a little and suggested running away right now while there was chaos here, and everyone immediately agreed with him. As a result, the only two witnesses who offended the Deus group died. And in later books it was mentioned that the sacred Stuart family fell for unknown reasons. The next morning, the hero woke up and remembered that since he said that he would focus on the store starting today, he needed to quickly open the store before the gentleman came. But as soon as he opened the door, he saw that there was a huge crowd standing in front of him who wanted to shop. He greeted the heroes and they all immediately ran inside to buy up the things that were there. The priestesses were choosing a staff for themselves, and Sir Alex approached them and said that this magic staff in their hands goes very well with the color of their magic. The man smiled and said that right now they were having a sale, 3 for the price of 2, and the girls immediately smiled at him and said that they would take a third one as well. Deus, meanwhile, sat on top and talked about how things were going well. He was also a little sad because he thought that he would get joy because people love making money, but it turns out that it is less exciting than he expected. Then he called his hero and said that he was heading up to take a nap, and Zeke said with a smile that they could handle it themselves. After that, the gentleman went to his room, which looked incredibly luxurious. He fell on the bed with a smile, and said that she was just great. But as soon as he closed his eyes, he felt someone's presence in the room. Waking up, he saw that the mother of dragons was standing in front of him, who said that she did not understand how this guy could sleep all the time. The girl also said that she watched him yesterday, and saw everything from beginning to end, and this is clearly a violation of the peace treaty. Deus said that he didn't really care, as long as he got paid, and the girl replied that she would pay. After that, the Demon King looked at the woman and said that this had been going on for many years, and she clearly knew about all this. He also said that he already knew that the dragons rebelled because when they found out the truth they were furious because their goddess did not intervene and therefore decided to take matters into their own hands. The girl said that she agrees that those who are uncompromising are spreading mycelium to attack people, but this is not the way of dragons. Deus asked in surprise what she was talking about, and the girl replied that every dragon has pride. Instead of stooping to their level, they will attack them to the last to avenge the loss of a friend, loved one or family member, and something is clearly not adding up here. The mother of dragons said that these parasites, like her, thought something strange, because dragons would never have created such a creepy and strange something similar to a curse. And someone else created something similar and gave it to them.